Hi, I'm your instructor, Matt Simmons. This is Introduction to Solid State Drive Technology, not any of the weird acronyms we found while we were kind of looking. So if you want to talk to me or about me on the internet, that's completely cool. My Twitter name is standaloneSA, so just feel free to mention me and, you know, whatever. I'll probably reply. I don't know what you guys wanted to get out of this class, because this is kind of a really open-ended topic, right? On one hand, it could be as wide as you want. On the other hand, it's like, how could you possibly do 3 hours of solid-state drives? As it turns out, we're not going to do 3 hours of solid-state drive, because we're going to talk about the baseline knowledge that kind of we all should have about hard drives before we move into how crazy solid-state is. Because a lot of people treat their hard drive like a magic bucket where data goes, and then you pull it out again, and it's awesome. And sometimes the bucket doesn't go fast enough, so we may get more buckets. Solid-state drives work like that, except the buckets are inherently fast. So we treat them like magic and hope that they do what we want. As I got started in this, I kind of blew my own mind. And this whole class spans from this one time I was sitting at my desk, and I looked down and I realized that I had a little flash drive sitting on a rare earth magnet. And then I picked up the drive and I put it in my computer, and it worked. And I thought, how the hell does this actually work? like there has to be something here. And I understood how magnetic media works, kinda, but not really to the point where I do now. And I thought, all right, so I got to go down this wonderful rabbit hole and really learn about storage in the process. So that's why I'm here to share it with you. We're going to talk about this first. So the evolution of storage technology has been kind of interesting, and I doubt you guys can read this in the back, but we started with cuneiform, right? Like, I think everybody kind of learned about that in their history class, where you have wedge-shaped, they were always important, wedge-shaped sticks, and use that up through the invention of punch cards, which were actually developed for a loom, not really a computer like we think of it, but the Jacquard loom, and then to the first, kind of like digital magnetic tape, which weirdly enough came from magnetic wire. They thought of wire before tape. Continuing on to the stuff that looks kind of familiar. And if you plot the density and the speed over time, the speed of access, not necessarily the speed of writing, but the speed of access over time, you get this kind of slow rise and this giant jump at the end as soon as you start getting into digital stuff. Right? Because suddenly machines are doing it instead of humans, and the machines are really dumb, but they're really fast too, which I kind of thought was interesting. One of the things that you guys might find interesting that I did too. So one of the problems with determining like paper, right? What the density per paper is, and this is not related to solid state except for the fact that paper is solid state, but think about information density in a piece of paper, right? If you write, it doesn't matter how small, but think about how you write. How much information is contained in a square inch of paper? In English, it is a completely different number than it is in any of the Asian languages that use pictographs. Interestingly, though, the read time is the same. It takes you as long as it takes you the same amount of time to decode a word in English composed of many characters as it does, generally speaking, to decode an Asian symbol, because all of the symbols are complex and you have to determine which one it is. I just thought that was very interesting, that kind of relationship. So let's talk about spinning disks. You guys have probably all done this, so I'm going to pass it around, and I don't expect this is new material for anybody. These are hard drives, okay? This is what it looks like on the inside. So here, feel free to pass it around and take a look as we go through, okay? Be careful not to touch the disk, then I won't be able to use it again. So, I've got important data on there. I would like to be able to get it off, so. Yeah, exactly. I've got a database that's going to wait to rebuild a RAID 5 here in a minute, so. Right, so as you look at it, the big round things are the platters, and that's actually where the data lives, right? They're magnetic and they have tracks, but essentially they are metal or ceramic. A lot of them are ceramic now, and they're covered with a kind of dust, and it's, it's ferrous because it has to be in order to be relayed by magnets, and that gives rise to the colloquialism of spinning rust, because it's spinning iron, and iron can rust. So Going in and out of the disks, you'll see actuator heads, or the actuator arms and the heads on the end, right? They sweep across the disk, and they align to tracks that are on the disk. And I know this is review for everybody, so I'm going to kind of go through this. And again, if anybody doesn't know this or has questions, feel free to speak up, because we're just trying to establish a baseline here. So don't feel bad if you don't know anything. And then those arms and the heads connect to the controller interface, right? Or the controller and the interface, I should say. And this is kind of where the magic happens and translates the bits it reads. And you put them together and you get a hard drive, right? Ta-da! It's all impressive. So the hard drive actually connects to the computer through one of these interfaces. Everybody's probably familiar with most of them, right? SATA is the serial ATA. It's the next generation of what we originally had, and that was, well, not originally, but what most of us, I think, grew up with, which was the parallel ATA, PATA, right, or IDE, like everybody calls it, because that's what I grew up with. The serial, and there's the SAS, which is here, and nearline SAS. And I put nearline SAS here because SAS is serial attached SCSI, which we are all probably familiar with, like Ultra SCSI and the stuff that came before that. That's with like parallel SCSI. SAS is those quality drives, right? So they have a lot of qualities that we'll talk about, but basically they're engineered to be much more reliable than the kind of SATA drives that you buy from Best Buy.
Order of magnitude, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of exactly, right. They write the bits bigger, they spin faster, but the tracks are wider, and basically it's just more reliable. It's less likely to lose bits on you, which means that your data is that much more robust.
Is it a regular SATA interface?
So these guys are essentially SATA drives with a native SAS interface. So one of the things we're going to talk about is that SAS and SATA are electrically compatible. You can plug a SATA drive into a SAS port. And as it turns out, the SATA language, right, the layer, you can think of it as a layer 2 language. The SATA protocol is compatible. It's a subset of the SAS protocol. So if you ever have an enterprise device that takes SAS drives, you could use a SATA drive in there, but it doesn't go the other way, right? Because SATA is a subset of SAS, you can't put a SAS drive in a SATA controller and expect anything to happen. Then there's also fiber channel, and you will notice the R comes before the E. When the R comes before the E, you're not talking about glass or plastic, you're talking about a protocol. And I'm pretty sure that's why they did that, right? Because fiber is so commonly used. You can actually run fiber channel over fiber, but you don't have to. You can use copper, whatever, token ring. And then there's PCIe. So I've actually seen like an old school hard drive back in the pre-386 days that was attached via, at the time, I don't even know what bus it was, but I think it was before ISA. It's like MCA maybe? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think it was MCA. YMCA, the YMCA bus. Yeah, that's.
We still have, although they're not spinning anymore, we still have some of the dishwasher-sized 50 meg disk packs in our data center.
Heck yeah.
Museum section.
That's awesome.
And our last streaming tape drive came out of production this year.
That's wicked. So what we're seeing is basically with the way that a whole lot of disk I/O is needed in terms of latency and in terms of throughput. The SAS, even the newest SAS, can't push data fast enough, right? So what a lot of people have done, like Fusion I/O, Violin Memory, Texas Memory Systems, they've literally been putting memory, like flash memory. It started out with SD RAM, or older RAM, but it started out with RAM. Now SD cards flash memory on the PCI bus, just because of the raw throughput, because you just can't push that much through the SAS protocol. It just doesn't work. We're at 6 gigs right now, and they need to go way, way faster for some of the RAID arrays we'll see. Spinning disk removable media, and for anybody who doesn't know what that is, that's a record. That's what we used to listen to a long, long time ago. Well, I say we, I was this, yeah, whatever. So, yeah, spinning disk removable media. How many people have actually seen spinning disk removable media? Hey, that's cool. Okay, cool. So everybody knows the ID or the USB, drives that you plug in, and you just like it's an IDE drive or a SATA drive that you plug into the USB. They actually have the compact flash, the IBM compact flash, which has a little tiny spinning disk inside of it, which is freaky to me because that seems really dangerous. But it doesn't really matter, if you're going that small, any kind of media is subject to these things, right? Like how many people have lost some kind of removable media? I know I have. So what are these other interfaces? SATA 1, 2, and 3. Depending on the speed, you can determine which version it is, basically. It allows really cool things like native command queuing, NCQ. That's actually the ability for the protocol to say, all right, we're going to try to optimize these instructions before the drive gets them, because the computer needs I/O, and the drive has certain requirements too that we're going to go into that have to do with its performance capabilities. And if you can optimize the instructions before they get to the drive, then you're going to be better off. And if you can make it transparent, then there's no problem at all. And that's what things like that are talking about. We discussed that it's a subset of SAS, and it actually does follow a lot of the IDE stuff that came before it. So it's not that hard to engineer in terms of new stuff. Man, I didn't have time, unfortunately. I had this really cool shark picture that I was going to, Photoshop in here. But this time it's personal. This is really exciting. mSATA is the ability to basically make pluggable SATA like in the front of a machine, or and a whole lot of other form factors that we're going to start seeing more often now that it's a well-accepted interface.
It's a progression of eSATA?
Uh,
Evolution of eSATA?
you could think of it like that. eSATA is primarily used for external devices, external arrays, things like that. This is going to be much more like, okay, I need to add storage to my TV box, right? Rather than opening it, I can just put that module in. But eSATA is fully external, right? This is, I think I show some interfaces here. Okay, I'm sorry.
Make him apologize.
I'm so sorry, God, please. I've never given this before, I'm sorry. QTrim.
Look it up.
Okay, all right. We'll all look it up, because I can be very wrong, okay? Like I said, I'm a writer. I'm used to having things right in front of me, and I can go to another tab if I'm curious. Like, oh, yeah, no, that was wrong. I'll fix it. And I can edit, yes. And I'm going to see if I can get a copy of the video before this goes live, so nobody will ever see this. Don't worry. Yeah. And QTrim is queued trim commands, which we'll talk about trim, but it's important when it comes to SSDs. SAS, nearline SAS. So for a long, long time, hard drives were 512 byte blocks, right? Like that's just kind of how big the independent unit was. And we deal with a lot of data now, and it's big and fast, and 512 is a really small, discrete number to go for. So they agreed kind of, I don't remember the standard, but everybody is moved to 4K for SATA stuff, right? But the SAS drives stayed with 512, except that there's also this additional size. And what the additional bytes are used for is basically CRC checking. So not only does, to back up, SATA does have 4 bits, I want to say, is that right, Adam? it does have a very small amount of checking. So basically, we're reading magnetic waveforms, right, when we read from a magnetic disk. And you have to be able to determine, is this really the magnetic bits that were stored? And in order to do that, you get a small amount of checksum. These have the ability, the SAS drives have the ability to store a lot more data besides just the 512. It's a whole lot of checksum to make sure that the data that you wrote is the data that you're reading, okay? And it'll throw errors if it comes out that the magnetic bits have been changed. And there are a lot of ways that that could have happened since the last time you wrote it. And, you know, we'll see that.
I think the SATAs do support 8 because I think some SATAs are 525 blocks.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know they supported 8.
Yeah, possibly. I know that, I don't remember whether it was with SATA 1 or SATA 2, but there was.
I think it came in with SATA 2 and
Yeah, 'cause
there
there
was
was
a native command queuing.
Was it 8-bit?
Where the SATAs were coming out with 520 byte blocks.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's cool. Okay. I know that it did 4 for some period of time, but I don't know. I didn't know it went to 8 if it did, and you know, I'll have to check. And nearline SAS is, oh God, no, go back. Really? Whatever. Okay. Yeah, it's just going to be one of those days. Really?
Look, MSATA is like micro SD, whereas eSATA is the external.
Is that what it is? Okay. Cool. Thanks. Yeah. So there. All right. So disk geometry, right? So you've got these platters that, you know, I hope someone has thrown away by the time they got to the back. That's fine.
E-band had already visited them?
That was so long ago. They were on desktop machines that were imaged, so I'm not too worried, honestly. I mean, if you want to take a a scanning electron microscope to the disk,
Go for it.
you go for it, man. Hey, enjoy your shared libraries. So one of the things you might have seen if you looked was that there are multiple platters, okay? And that's for capacity as well as throughput, but mostly capacity because there's just a limit to what we were actually capable of putting on and reading back in terms of discrete size of the bits. This does not like me. We talked about tracks. Logically and historically, you can think of them as concentric, right? So one inside of the other, and that doesn't necessarily reflect reality anymore. They can be spiraled into the middle. They can. It's all logical, right? The various tracks and cylinders, which would, if you look at, like, say, the blue here, here, and here, you notice they all kind of line up. They form a cylinder, a logical cylinder.
And the underside, right?
Yeah.
Two-side platter.
Yeah, some of them are. Some of the platters, most of the platters that you'll see are two-sided, but I have actually seen drives that don't have all of the platters with heads because they will sell those as a smaller capacity. Because you literally, like, don't put the top of the head or the top head on and there are no bits there that you can manage, so you just don't have that capacity. It makes a really easy way to increase capacity because then you just add a head and, you know, the additional cost apparently justifies the additional cost. No. But yeah, and you can picture both of these sides as being populated with data.
The crap song is on the underside.
The crap song, yeah,
B-side,
the
yeah.
B-side, right. And then radiating out from the middle, you'll have basically wedges, right? And these are sectors. And in this diagram thing that I did with Google SketchUp, you can see that the outside here clearly has more data than the inside here, assuming that the tracks are the same width. Originally, it was like that, but they became zoned. And I'll show you a diagram of that here in a couple. But so cylinder and head, which is which side of which numbered platter, and sector, CHS, was the prevalent way to address a particular block. Those all became imaginary when we moved to logical block addressing. So instead of this crazy array of numbers that you had to keep track of and how many heads do I have in sectors and whatever, it got changed and replaced with a linear address space. And the size of the address space is a function of which version you're at. We're currently at a 48-bit, as far as I can tell. I haven't seen anything newer. So this becomes very important because this is the current way that you or your computer will address the storage, okay? And when it comes to SSDs, this is going to play a huge part. So keep this in mind, right? Your blocks on your hard drive, regardless of where they exist on the platter or on the track out, are addressed via a number, okay?
That's number of blocks, size of block, gives you total disk size.
Yes, exactly. And most spinning disks that you'll see now that aren't SAS are 4K blocks, and the SAS disks are 512 byte blocks addressable. Spinning disks have a whole lot of variables that can affect how fast you can put and get data from it. There's the platter rotational speed. So everybody who's ever ordered a hard drive has noticed there are huge price differences between a 5400 RPM drive and a 15,000 RPM drive. And that's because you need a whole lot of accuracy in order to get the disk up to that speed, get things aligned, and not have crazy vibrations. I didn't actually embed it, but there's a really interesting video of somebody who has put a metal disk on a drill and spun it up to the point where it just flies apart, right? And before it flies apart, you see it start to warp and wave, and that's a function of, you know, the material science problems. We just can't build a drive that goes a whole lot faster than 1500 or 15K because the disk will fly apart. Seek speed. So if you saw the hard drive I passed, you'll notice this arm, right? That's the actuator arm. Here's the head. And you can't see it because they're tiny, but there are tracks. And so as the disk needs to align with the track, it spins out like this, right? And it's got a voice coil in here that's like a magnetic, the big magnet here, and the two magnets arrange each other so that the head meets the track that it wants. The coils now are accurate enough that literally half of the seek time is getting to the track. The other half is the vibration of the head bouncing back and forth as it settles into the right track.
You stop quickly, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's vibrating, right? Because there's no motor here, right? That's completely electromagnetic. It's really kind of amazing that it works at all, given how fast it's going and how quickly it needs to get there.
4 millisecond average seek time these days?
Yeah, something like that. And then if you consider 2 milliseconds of that, it's actually getting it to the right track. That's insane. My clicker die? No? Okay. So I'm just going to have to stand over here, apparently. So these are the tracks that we talked about, right? So the inside of the disk platter has a certain density, and the outside has been separated out so that it actually has the same density. Because if you consider the rotational speed, these are going a lot slower than these, right? So you're going to have to be able to read at the fastest rate, and that's going to be here. And so these guys are conservatively bigger. Interestingly enough, there's a technique called short stroking, where you essentially cut out the middle of the disk and don't partition it. You only partition the outside edge because it's going the fastest, right? And that has the fastest access time in terms of linear read and linear write. And then you only use that for linear data, and it flies. It can approach SSD speeds like that. And were we talking about the licensing that somebody used?
Yeah, there are several disk companies that do something similar. They actually automatically tier their arrays so that if there are different drive technologies in the array, they can move blocks around. And at least one of the companies, you can buy an additional license that will create a tier on the outer sectors and outer cylinders of the drive as opposed to the inner cylinders of the drive. So if it needs that little more boost of performance, it'll move all of those blocks to the outside.
For some ludicrous sum of money.
That
Like to net out.
no, it's actually compellant, and the license isn't that expensive,
Oh,
but it's expensive.
Well, sure, because you're also throwing away a significant chunk of your spinning
No,
reps.
they'll still use the inner cylinders. It's just that they consider it a tier. So it's a slower tier of disk on the inner cylinders versus the outer cylinders.
Which is really pretty terrible because as soon as your arm goes to the inside,
Yeah.
you've got to,
Lock your bed.
exactly, yeah, you've got to seek back out. Jacob?
Do you have any statistics on how, you know, you can do some math to figure out, but do you have any statistics on how much faster the outside of the disk moves than the inside?
If
So
you look at the sector count there, your number of bits per rotation,
1, 2, 3, 4.
4x.
Yeah.
So,
So fast, right? For a spinning disk that's going 15. Oh God. For a spinning disk that's going at 15K. That's pretty good. Yeah, I just think it's ludicrous that they do that. Like,
oh yeah.
slimy. So controller cache. We're going to be talking about different kinds of cache as later in the presentation. So let me introduce you, if you're not familiar, with the two prevalent kinds. There is write-through cache, okay, and that is where data is written to a very fast media and to a very slow media that it is going to be stored on long term. And it's not acknowledged until it's on the long-term media. Okay? That is write through because it has to go all the way through. Then there's write back cache. Write back cache is it's written to a fast media, acknowledged immediately, and then at its convenience written back to the long-term storage. For things like this, which is non-volatile memory, or volatile memory rather, things that will go away if you power it down. You don't want to use write back unless it's battery back, because if your power dies, your data goes away, and even it's been acknowledged, so things fall over, and it's really bad. So with RAM, you wanna do write through cache because you need it to go onto the long-term data. You need to make sure your data's there. SSDs, as we'll see, are kind of allowing this interesting new technique of writing back from very, very fast media, and it's achieving kind of amazing things in terms of virtualization especially, but any kind of random I/O. The amount of cache that your hard drive has a large amount of effect on your read times. Not so much on your write times, because you're still going to write through and make sure that it's on the spinning media, but if you read back, if it's in the RAM and if it's a RAM or a cache hit, it's going to be immediate.
Now you're talking about the controller on the disk, or
Yes.
you're talking about the controller in the RAID controller?
No, this is on the disk, right? And
So would you have a battery on your disk or a super cap?
so on a spinning disk,
Yeah.
on a spinning disk you don't.
Well, you said battery. That's why I thought we went down to the RAID.
Oh, sorry. In a spinning disk, there's typically no battery-backed controller, right, in the disk itself. So it's only going to be write through, right? Your stuff's going to get written to the disk, and it's going to get written onto the spinning disk, and it won't be acknowledged until it hits the spinning disk. But as soon as you're reading from that, you go way faster because you're reading from RAM. And if your hard drive powers down, it's already written. You're not losing anything by losing your cache. So that's going to change with SSDs though, because we'll see. Damage vectors. So there are moving parts obviously in a hard drive, and anybody who's ever dropped a laptop and had your drive die, you understand like this is a sad scenario. Movement is bad for hard drives. Typically, the amount of damage that it takes, or the amount of movement that it takes to damage a hard drive, measured in G-forces, and it causes issues. One of the issues is the head crash that I put here. Essentially, and I don't have. Anybody have a hard drive that I? Here, let me take a look. Okay. So.
About 7 Gs there.
Yeah. All right. So we've got pretend there's a head here. There really isn't. But if there were, it would be right there. And you can't see it, but it's floating over, well, not right now. When the disk is spinning, it's floating very, very small amount over the surface of the platter, okay? And it actually uses the Bernoulli force. It's the ground effect force that helps airplanes take off. Doesn't cause it, it helps it. But essentially it's floating on a thin, thin layer of air. And there's a certain amount of force that it takes to cause that head to land. And when that head lands and the disk is turning at 15,000 rotations per minute, it gouges out the disk, and it's a visible line, and it's like stunning in terms of what it looks like, because it is gouging your data away wherever it was on the disk, and that is no fun for anybody. It's very dramatic. What's left? Yeah, at 15K, yeah, or, 7,200 RPM even. Yeah, you think the click of death is bad? It's like, not good. So even more insidious, though, that is a movement like this, right? Perpendicular to the disk. This is, like I said, magnetic, right? And very, very precise. So imagine the force of shifting it like this, okay? That seems so much less dramatic. But what that can actually do, if it's writing when it's doing that, is it will cause the head to move enough to misalign on the track, and it'll overwrite another track, right? So it's on track, and then you move it parallel with the disk, and it slides out of track and changes the magnetic signature on the next track. And that's why things like the CRC checking is important, because you need to know if that happened. Otherwise, your data is not going to live long. What freaks me out, if you look at some of the storage companies who I will not name, they actually have disk arrays that are essentially 3U shelves with literally three shelves, and you pull the disks out in order to replace them while the disks are running. You don't quiesce the disks, you don't stop writes. They're like, we engineered it so that you can pull out the drawer and work on disks live. And I'm like, I am never buying that product, because I am scared to death that the parallel movement against the platters will cause problems. It freaks me out. But they're making money, so that's what counts, I guess.
Are they inserted vertically or horizontally when they slide out?
Let's see. I don't know. I don't remember.
I'm not sure which one you're thinking.
There's an X in the name. I can't remember, but that's like half of the new storage. Yeah, I'll take a look. I'll look over the break and let you know. But yeah, it just freaks me out. I'm not all about moving disks while they're live.
Well, once you, if they're a hot plug disc, once you unlatch it, it's not live anymore. It's spinning, yes, but.
No, and I agree. But what this is,
The shelf.
Yeah.
I think you're saying the shelf comes out, which means.
Exactly. There are 3 drawers in this shelf of disks, and the disks are all the way through the entire length.
And you're pulling out a shelf in order to pull one drive out of.
Yeah. Freaky, not cool. Yeah. Exactly. I wasn't that. I've got several disks. It's in a RAID. Well, it's fine. Whatever. Yeah. Okay. So active drive connection or protection. Anybody here have a Mac that still has a spinning disk in it? Okay. With you?
Yes.
Okay. Lift it up.
No.
No, it's okay. So.
Imagine he lifted it up.
If you would imagine that, what you would hear as you bring it like that is a click. And what that click is, there's an accelerometer in the disks. This does not have it. Where's the small one? Hey, you guys have the, oh God, no. Man, I'm just causing problems. Yeah, I keep tripping over it. That's okay. Let's see, is this the one? Yeah. So, okay. If you look on this, there's that little orange thing over on the side there. The other hard drive doesn't actually have that. What that little orange thing is a ramp, okay? And whenever the Mac detects freefall, it immediately uses the rotational inertia of the disk to power the arm to go over and launch itself onto that ramp to pull the head away from the disk platter, right? So that it'll protect it. And it's really pretty good. They have laptops that have them built in, right? Like the MacBook stuff. And they have hard drives that have them built in. So I'll put this here if anybody wants to take a look at it. They're available in others. In fact,
IBM was using it with their ThinkPad line as a marketing point
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
As I said, taking the guy's laptop and dropping it on the floor in the diner. That's not my laptop.
That's rough. Yeah, no, there are a whole lot of manufacturers of laptops and drives that have them built in. You want to be careful not to mix the two. If your computer has one and the drive has one, they're going to disagree. And I've heard of OS crashes happening repeatedly because the two accelerometers were fighting and locking the disk when it shouldn't have been. And just, I would, do your research before you do that.
Well, today you would simply say, well, get rid of that and put it in an SSD.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you would, and I will, but you would.
Unless you need more capacity than an SSD.
Well, then you just buy cheaper SSDs. Ironically. So, okay, we talked about the lift arm stuff. Yeah.
For that reason, would you recommend, as far as external hard drives, like for non-SSD stuff, do you recommend the smaller when marketed as portable hard drives compared to bigger brick external hard drives? Because I don't know if I wasn't sure if portable hard drives usually have that.
Okay, so that brings me to another tangent. Anybody here old enough to? Yeah, I know some people are old enough to have to manually park the disk head.
What?
Manually park the disk head.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there used to be this technique before you turned off your computer that you would park the disk head, because if you stopped applying power to the disk, the head would stop. The disk would stop spinning, which the Bernoulli force would fall, and you would land the head onto the disk.
And sometimes it happened just before the disk stopped fully spinning.
And then you have a head crash. Yeah.
Not always. The early Winchester technology, theoretically, I emphasize that because I have a story to tell. But the surface was supposed to be hard enough that the head could actually touch it. Not often, but lightly, without causing that sort of damage. That's what the computer store told me. Telling me for 2 hours, and I kept telling him I had a head crash. Then the tech poked his head and said, yeah, they had a head crash. There were I'm talking about the early 5-inch steel drives where we had clear cover, and you could see.
That's gruesome. So what they have kind of advanced to before the ramp technology, and they still have them to this day, is a landing strip, right? Which is an area of the disk that is safe for the head to fall down on. So it used the rotational speed of the disk to power the head to go over to hit the landing strip. The problem was that even though you have this safe area of the disk where you don't have data, so you're not going to lose any if the head crashes, it's a very, very smooth surface, right? Both the head and the disk are very, very smooth. And if you left it like that, you ran into a problem called stiction. Why does everybody giggle when I say that? It's because they know what it is.
That's an answer.
Yes.
That is not recommended in general, right? Like, what if it's not stick? But anyway, so stiction is basically the lack of motivation. The disk has to turn because the head's stuck, and it's bad. You could break it, but so to fix that, one of the things that they've done is change the landing strip. So instead of just having a regular smooth surface that the stiction can happen on, they have a pebbled surface, and it's covered with a nanotechnology. I don't even know how they do it, but it's like a sprayed non-stick surface, like Teflon, but smaller, and it doesn't stick anymore. So you are safe to do that. And that's standard practice now. You don't ever have to park your disk heads. So as long as you power off the disk, it's fine. Also, I would recommend not putting the disk on the edge of the table where it could fall off while it's spinning. So I want to show you a video. Movement is bad, as we've discovered. And as it turns out, vibration is movement. Don't ruin this for anybody if you know what's going on.
Applying This is not special effects, this is real. What we're looking at here is the effect of disk vibration. Vibration is a serious issue, and we can see the effect here that it's caused. So here, the latency for the disks that are under the workload has gone up. Here I can see which disks have now had I/O operations longer than 500 milliseconds, and I can find out that they belong to the J-Birds I was just shouting at.
That might be one of my favorite videos on the internet.
So speak nicely to them.
Yeah.
Don't yell at them.
It explains so much.
It does.
Get them carpenters, not death metal.
I have heard all kinds of anecdotes of people having some storage in one rack be fine and another storage in another rack in the other part of the data center just having horrendous disk failure issues and it being traced back to vibrations within the building, either based on load-bearing columns or AC or something like that. So not something to, you know, forget about. It's pretty interesting. A lot of people have this habit of writing data to disks and then throwing them on a shelf and later wanting to get the data back. As it turns out, that's not always a really awesome idea because of problems like this. Hard drives are not meant to spin down. I know that sounds crazy, but they exist so that you can store data on them, and they're not engineered for its shelf life in mind. So the oil will break down, the bearings will leak, temperature fluctuations are not good, they'll warp the disks, things like that. Also, this is interesting to take into account too. If you look at a hard drive, there's generally a little vent point that it says, you know, don't cover this vent point, and that's to allow outgassing and moisture to equalize with the rest of the room. I hear people putting, you know, disks in freezers, and that freaks me out. And I'm like, really? Because that's when it spins up, you know, get your data quick. Yeah. If you do have need for a really long-term archival solution, there are interesting solutions from different companies where they'll basically have a giant freezer drawer of disks, and they're mostly turned off, but you know, for 5 minutes every week, they'll spin up and read and make sure to redistribute everything and put it back.
These are what, made arrays?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, RAID is a solution for lots of things, or at least it was. We're moving on slowly, but I can go over the RAID levels, but I figured you guys probably are. Anybody uncomfortable with RAID levels want to talk about RAID? Yeah. All right, so it's basically just ways to keep performance up and redundancy available. We'll skip that. Something that I do want to talk about, software versus hardware RAID, right? So as people leave, I'm gradually talking to the storage people who know more than me, and this is fun. I had a really great argument on the internet the other day.
No.
Yeah, I know, it's hard to believe. As it turns, someone was wrong on the internet, and
I don't believe it.
yeah. So the discussion boiled down to hardware RAID or software RAID. And before you get your pickaxes and torches and stuff, there are so many opinions, and I have many of them. There's really no hardware RAID, all right? At this point, it's all software, because even the controller is running software. And now, there are arguments about how many eyes have seen it and how well debugged it is and whether or not you need battery-backed, you know, cache and, you know, what your OS is doing. But in essence, is this software RAID that comes from LSI better than the software RAID that comes from the Linux kernel? And I think, honestly, the answer is not all that often, right? Like, I think Linux is okay. There are some edge cases that I have heard of that I'm not going to get into because I don't want to start holy wars, but basically, you know, these are considerations that you should make, and you should spend some time researching what the current state is, because it'll probably be different than it is today.
Well, and 10 years ago, there was a big difference.
Oh yeah.
Especially when you're really not talking about software RAID, but fake RAID.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's
The crap fake
The
RAID.
promise hardware, software RAID crap where you have the controller card and a driver. The runs in Windows.
Right. And you know what it's doing. You know underneath there's not a RAID controller. There's a piece of software that runs on your Windows machine that's doing RAID talking to the, yeah, I mean, like, it's fake RAID, like you said. Yeah.
Just the other thing was, my latest desktop that I got a while ago came with the ability to do a fake RAID, and I've messed around with it, and gotten drives that, got a drive that would, drop out of the array. I thought it was just bad. I didn't know as much about RAID. I didn't explore it. I got a new, drive. Within like 2 months, it also dropped out of the array. And what I slowly learned though is that they weren't RAID-aware disks that were really meant for it, so they would have.
Was this Western Digital Green?
I think it was a Western Digital. I don't remember the exact.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it was one of them where they would go through a period of self-checks that would cause the RAID routine to time out, so the controller or the fake RAID thought that it was bad or out or something.
A lot of consumer drives understand that they're probably not going to be placed in RAID and will go to absolutely heroic efforts to get your data back. So if it has an unrecoverable read error and it can't get it back, it won't just kind of give up for after a few seconds like a SAS drive will, or a really high quality drive. It's going to keep trying like for minutes at times, and it will not become either a failed member of the RAID or anything. It's basically just saying, hang on, let me try, hang on, let me try. And I mean, it to the point where it will fall out of RAID by forcing the controller to give it up. Yeah.
Yeah, so just something I saw that consumer manufacturers seem to be fine mixing those two worlds when things aren't in agreement, and it seems damaging.
I've found it easier because I build all my own, everything but laptops I build myself, and I buy enterprise grade. Even if they're SATA, I buy the ES drives, or the ES equivalent drives. So I figure it's worth the money to me to have reliability.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you definitely get what you paid for in terms of hard drives. So considerations with your RAID are obviously redundancy, capacity, speed, how robust is it. That's Daft Punk because I thought that was really, really close to harder, better, faster, stronger.
Was that Cylon versus Iron?
No, that was the two Daft Punk helmets.
That's when they're new, like viral promo.
Yeah. It's a cool Photoshop. God, my microphone's pulling. Right, so advantages, like any disks, right? Linear speed, linear access speed is really fast with RAID because you've got a whole bunch of disks doing all kind of the same thing and not seeking, and it's really great. Price per gigabyte, especially with the modern technology of throwing as many bits onto a hard drive as they possibly can. And we've been doing it for a really long time, so there aren't really any surprises left in the controllers to screw up, right? Everybody's it's a solved problem essentially at this point. Random I/O sucks because like we said, we've got the seek arm, it's got to get to where it's going, and then it's got to settle, and then it has to go somewhere else because somebody else wants something. Even if you have a whole bunch of disks all running in the same RAID set, like it's stripes, so they all change, and nobody's doing linear, and it all sucks. Failure rates, oh yeah. So at one point in time, RAID 5 was seen as a really cool idea. And then gradually disk capacities increased, so now your odds of encountering a failure are high enough such that you can have a RAID 5 volume and have a drive fail. No problem, you've got redundancy, right? You've still got the entire data set, so you pull a drive out. Everything's still fine because that drive was dead. You put a new drive in and it has to rebuild the parity, and as it does that, the entire array dies. And that's because one of the other disks that was rebuilding wasn't able to get the bit that it needed, and it has given up, hit a URE, it's called unrecoverable read error, and now your data is gone and you have to restore from backup. So RAID 6 is double parity. So that means if you lose a drive, you can rebuild, and if one of the other drives encounters URE, as it probably will, you can continue your journey to getting your data back. Storage metrics, God. How do I love and hate storage metrics? The gold standard for sales pitches is IOPS, the I/O operations per second. And man, So Adam, you are subjected to quite a lot of sales presentations. How many times in the past 3 years have you not had somebody tell you that their array can support some kind of ridiculous number of IOPS?
I don't know that I remember the last time that I was not told that their array could support a ridiculous number of IOPS.
And isn't it always a number like 12 million IOPS, or I'm making that up, of course, but it's always like
The magic number these days seems to be 100,000. We can do 100,000 IOPS.
because it's an IOP and it's kind of like a Lego block, right? You just put a whole bunch of them together, and that's 100,000 in that array. Like you just pull some out if you need them and put them back when you're done. Yeah. It doesn't actually work like that. It's not an absolute number, right? So an I/O operation per second is very dependent on your data. It's dependent on your access methods. It's dependent on how much data you're pulling out, what your ratio of reads to writes are, and anybody who tells you that they can absolutely push a certain number is selling you something, obviously, but they're selling you something in a very well-maintained environment that they know the I/O profile such that they can tune it to do whatever they want to say that they can do. Yeah, so this is the actual equation. Well, this is a simplified equation, right? This doesn't take into account certain percentages that you should know about, or block size, or anything like that. But the important variables here are the read time, the write time, and the latency, right? So how fast can it get data? How fast can it put data? And how fast can it get to where it's going, right? So you can think of latency as on the platter, the head is here. Your data might live here. How long does it take for the data to go from here to here, right? Seems pretty simple, and it's actually a function of the speed of the spinning disk. And you take the speed of the spinning disk, divide by the number of seconds in a minute, and then cut that in half, and that's your average, because you figure half of the time it's closer, half of the time it's farther, and it all equals out. And then there's the seek time, which is how long it takes it to settle, right? And we decided it was about 4 seconds for modern stuff, slower for your consumer stuff. This is really like the kind of generally accepted rule of thumb. If you want to know how many IOPS a drive can give you, you can look at a drive and say, oh, it'll give me about that. The amount of cache on there will matter, because your read will go way up. The current used percentage of read and write will change it, but that's a ballpark, right? It's not ridiculously out in terms of what you'll see in real life. So that was per drive, and there's the manufacturer stated number, the rule of thumb, which we just saw, and then there's per RAID. And then it gets complicated, right? Because not only do you add up the numbers, but you've also got to subtract some, because we talked about parity. It has to calculate parity, it has to write parity, but it doesn't do that necessarily in the way that you think it should. So if you have 4 disks in a RAID 5, you might think, well, I have 3 bits of data and I have a parity bit. So it's going to know what those 3 are, and then it's going to calculate that 4th bit. So it's going to write all 4 at the same time. And in fact, some controllers do that. They have a very low write penalty. But what you'll see is that in the Linux kernel, for instance, it will write the 3, and then it will read the 3. And then it will calculate the parity and write the parity. And that just kind of sucks.
And then it will acknowledge the write.
And then it acknowledges the write, exactly. Because it's not written until that 4th bit is written, and it's all on disk. So you've got this.
In that case, you're actually confirming that the write happened as you expected, correct?
Correct.
So
It's a trade-off.
Feature in return for performance.
Yes. But if you're looking at the I/O profile, it's going to look really ugly if you're using the software RAID, even though in this case it might be more reliable. It's just not doing it the way you wanted it to do it.
RAID stripe size matters, and the block size matters from the application.
Oh
to
God,
the
yes.
OS.
Right. Yeah. Sure, the disk might be 4K, but what's the stripe size on the RAID? Is it 64K? Does your RAID card do things like aggregate writes until it hits the stripe size? Does your OS require all kinds of block? I mean, like, it's really hard to kind of figure out ahead of time what I/O you're going to see. It's much easier to take a system that works and tell you what kind of I/O you have. And, you know, it's an inexact science, unfortunately. And we don't have a good way to determine what the usage is. And once, even if you can determine what the usage is, any other usage on that array is going to screw you up. So it's just really hard. So how do you tell? Well, I you know, go with the rule of thumb when it comes to projecting. But to find out, you can use Bonnie++, which is a really great tool. DD is a really simple way. If you just want to find out like what your linear write is, like, man, this is really sucking. Is it really sucking bad? I use DD sometimes. And Intel has a NAS toolkit that'll help you out. Those are all active, right? That will actually write and do benchmarking and stuff like that. If you want to watch to see what's happening, these I/O applications will help. And in Windows, the Resource Monitor and the Process Explorer all have ways to kind of gauge I/O and I/O per process. So, and if you're in a sufficiently advanced operating system, you can use dtrace to watch what's happening. I'm sorry? I haven't, but yes.
Lie to me, consistently.
Well, it does lie to you the first time, you're right. If you ever run it, you get two numbers back. The first one is the buffered one.
Yeah.
It's a complete lie. It's just moving from memory to memory back to memory. You know how fast the memory goes.
Yeah.
The second number, that's the one that consistently wants to be useful.
Well, and it lets you, you know, if you use it as a baseline, it lets you know what's changing.
Yeah.
You know, if you knew what happened before, you can say something changed. And that's useful.
Yeah, we usually use it on the SAN. We know what the average is usually on the SAN. Gives you a pretty good number, and then you see, you know, like it's usually 300 megabits a second. Drops down to 80, like.
So yeah, but that's an important note too. You know what your baseline is. Get your array and your storage system functioning well, so that when it isn't functioning well, you know what the delta is. Even if you don't know what's causing it, you can trace it down by finding it and knowing that it exists. So now that we've gone all the way back to ancient history, let's talk about what we're here for, solid state drive technology. Anybody not used one yet? Really? Okay. You will soon. So anybody not using one on their laptop? Okay. I don't know what your reason is. I suspect it's related to money or related to longevity. Let me assure you. Capacity?
Which is another way of saying money.
Okay. Let me assure you, and I can't assuage your fears on capacity, but in terms of performance, it will buy itself back in absolutely no time. And in terms of longevity, my current recommendation is to treat it like race car tires. Okay? And we're going to talk about why it goes away and why it fails, but the fact that it does happen is undeniable. You will eventually lose solid state drives. It's going to probably take a lot longer than you think it will. But until then, use the speed and back it up, because it will absolutely buy itself back in terms of your productivity.
For laptops, I found even if they have a maximum number of cycles of boots and runs, it's more than made up for by the use the laptops take from people, where you see way more vibration and impact and stuff drive failures. And then when you switch to SSDs, it's like you stop getting brain and laptop corruption issues.
It is, yeah, I mean, there are so many benefits.
Well, you don't pick your laptop with the boots in 10 seconds. Boots in a minute and a half, you're whacking it around and you destroy the drive.
My quality of life since I have an SSD in my laptop has gone way up, and I'm not even being facetious. Like, the fact that I can open any application on my hard drive, including Omnigraphel, in like a second is ridiculous. And before I go into any of the technology, I want to pitch it to you. If you don't have one on your work machine or on the machine that you use the most, do it now. Like, order from Newegg. I won't get upset if you go to Newegg and order right now. It's totally worth it. Just, get yourself a Samsung and move on. Right, so as it turns out, there are two different kinds of flash. There's NOR flash, which we've all had in our computers in the BIOS for quite a while. Not forever, but for a while. This has the ability to read and write an individual bit. That might not sound important, but it really is, because it's the only kind of flash that can do that. It's also way more expensive than NAND flash, which is the other kind of flash. NAND flash has the concept of a read block. Much like a spinning hard drive has a 4K block size right now for most of them. NAND flash has a 4K read block. Cool. Write blocks, though, are based on the erasure block size. And this is a concept that we don't have in spinning disks. And we'll talk about why. But essentially, the core lesson here is that you can read 4K discretely. You can write a multiple of 4K, a large multiple, okay? And it's a set number per controller, or essentially per drive, and you can't change it, okay? That means that every time you want to erase something from that block, you have to erase the entire block. This turns out to be important. So we have logical addresses inside, in the storage, that are abstracted away from the LBA that we're all used to, right? You never get to see them. The flash controller deals with them. They're there, but you don't ever know. And that's important too, because you can't just request one. All you can do is request an LBA, and the controller is responsible for getting you whatever address it has for that. There's no seek time, absolutely none. Okay, it's essentially a memory lookup in a table. So all that time spent getting the arm aligned is gone. All the time spent waiting for the disk to turn is gone. So if you look at the IOPS equation to determine what it can actually do, it's like off the charts. A single disk can perform as well as an entire array of spinning disks. It's awesome. Reads very fast, okay? In part because of the way that it distributes writes, but essentially it flies. And I'll show you some benchmarks here in a bit. Writes, though, writes are a lot slower because it has to write a whole lot more cells, because often it's going to find itself needing to do garbage collection in order to create space. You just have to know the I/O on a spinning disk is very, very symmetrical, right? Read, write, kind of the same. Random and linear are the big differences. Not so much. This was actually the very first breakthrough that I made when I kind of built my mental model. This is how it works. Anybody here know how a transistor works? Like an NPN or a PNP, right? Okay, so what we have here, and I really don't like this, I'm gonna use this. Way cooler. So what we have here in this gray area is electronically pure silicon, okay? It is a good insulator. It will not conduct, right, which is the same thing. And here we have doped pits of silicon. And these doped pits will hold an electrical charge. Over the top, we have a thin film of dielectric material. What I haven't drawn here is a charge injector. And the way that a flash cell holds a charge is the charge injector pushes the charge through the dielectric material, which when it's presented with this positive charge will turn basically into a gate and allow a charge to come through, gets stored here. And then when the charge stops, this closes and it prevents the electrons from escaping. At the bottom, which I have also not drawn, there is a sensor, essentially, that will electrically tell whether or not, and I'll show you in a second, that will be able to tell whether or not there's a charge in the pits. And the way that it does that is magic. Anybody here a physicist? This is sufficiently magic for me. Anybody here into physics a lot? Okay, maybe you can explain this to me at the break. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute and explain this because this is really, really mind-blowingly cool. What this equation describes is the probability curve of an electron being through a barrier. So everybody here has taken some kind of chemistry class in high school, right? So we were all kind of presented with the atomic model of a nucleus being some little balls, and then some balls on the outside, farther away, that were smaller, that were electrons. And the electrons are arranged in concentric shells, right? And we use the number of electrons at any particular shell to form covalent bonds and to allow molecules to form. Okay, that's a simplistic model that I think everybody kind of knows isn't really how it goes. But as it turns out, the electrons are in a cloud. Okay, they're moving very fast, and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That's the cloud. That's the one. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle says that you can't know both where one is and how fast it's going. So where it is can be described by a probability curve, that thing. And if you look at the curve, imagine it's a roughly bell curve, and around the electron, it's probably, or around the nucleus, it's probably there, right? So all of this you can look at as that's the most likely, but there are these tails on the end. And that tail is kind of like saying there is a non-zero chance that the electron in the, where'd it go? The electron in here might actually be out here. Now, obviously, this is not to scale, but but the concept is basically there is a non-zero chance that the electron is going to be outside of that. Okay, and what that sensor does is picks up the electrons that fall outside of that curve. How cool is that? That's freaking awesome. Science rocks. And when I found that out, my mind kind of went, that's awesome. So, get rid of my clicker? No, it's there. So that is how it determines whether or not there is a charge in the cell. So if you look at this, you're like, all right, well that's cool. You can measure the electrical level, right? So if there's a charge, it's high, and if there's not a charge, it's low, essentially. But can you just tell if there's a charge? Maybe there are variable levels of charge, and as it turns out, there are. What we have is the ability to have single level and multi-level cells, right? So what this is basically doing is saying, well, okay, the charge, it's high, but how high? And we've established levels that define there is a charge. How many charges, are there? We actually have TLC, triple level cells. I have one in my MacBook Pro at home. My Samsung 440 SSD, non-Pro. The Pros are MLC, but my non-Pro is TLC. Three different charge levels. Three different bits, you would say. Because in terms of charge levels, it's really hard because there are a lot of them, right? So basically, it's look at the green. Is the green high or is the green low? Is the yellow high or is the yellow low? Is the red high or is the red low? And by using those Boolean states, we can come up with, several bits. Now, sadly, this has problems over time because the cells gradually lose their ability to store bits. And the reason for that is that every single time you store something, it has to pass through that dielectric layer that we talked about. And every time the charge pump pushes electrons through, some of the electrons remain in that level, or in that dielectric layer, which means that over time, the potential difference between this and that becomes 0, right? And then here becomes 0. So basically, the sensors down here aren't able to tell if there's a charge because it has accumulated enough of a charge that it's like background noise. And at that point in time, the cell is dead and you can't use it anymore. And that is why SSDs die over time. So we're creative species, us humans, and we are able to shrink and shrink and shrink to increase capacity, and we've done that with both spinning disks and with SSDs. We have multiple bits per cell, right? The size of the cells has decreased because our ability to accurately determine what the charge level is has increased. And I like to think of it as dot pitch, like with a monitor, like how far apart are the individual dots. You know, all of this density varies with however many levels we have, and we're currently down to 2 nanometers apart in terms of flash cells, which is pretty crazy.
Is that for SLCs?
If it's not for SLCs, it's for MLCs. I imagine that, I mean, like logically, I would say that SLCs are the smallest, but I seem to recall that there was some kind of discrepancy in my logic in terms of like what made sense. I would have to look it up. It's on the wiki page somewhere. So let's talk about the various levels. SLC or enterprise SLC, which I don't actually see anymore because compared to some of the other stuff, SLC is really, really robust. It's relatively low density in terms of absolute space per, or absolute bits per space, just because it's only a single layer. It's very, very fast, right? You can see the times there, and those are in microseconds. It doesn't die nearly as quickly as any of the other cells, just because it's written to so much less frequently. And in fact, it will last, you know, 100,000 or more cycles. And then we have MLC and eMLC. And there's currently kind of a fight going on with enterprise storage. Some people are like, well, you know, we don't trust anybody who uses MLC. And then the people who use MLC are like, well, we don't even see the need for eMLC. You know, it's fine. People like Pure Storage, for instance. Pure Storage will sell you an array of solid-state disks, the size of a really big Cisco switch, and they'll charge you a house for it, basically. They use entirely MLC drives. Like everything in that's MLC, and the hard drives themselves are basically stock. The only thing they've done is change the firmware on the drives to cover up some of the weird oddities of the way that you need to rewrite things. But I mean, honestly, I would feel, oh, that's okay. I would feel completely comfortable buying an MLC drive, okay, for production, for my home use, whatever. If you're in the market and you're like, well, I don't want to buy MLC because I heard it doesn't have the right count, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. I mean, it's going to die, but your spinning disk is going to die someday too, or the capacity will be small enough that you just won't care anymore. It's eventual. It's going to happen, right?
And it's worth pointing out that's 3,000 cycles
Per cell.
per cell.
Per cell.
And
Yeah. No, but I will. It's in here. So I have to do 3.5 hours of this. My God. Like, I like talking about it, but you know, I feel bad for you guys, honestly, because I'm interested in it. TLC. Yeah. So about that. I bought it because I wanted fast storage that I wasn't particularly attached to. I use it, like I said, for my MacBook Pro. Well, I mean, so look at the write endurance, right? 1,000 cycles per cell. Now, granted, it's going to take a long time for me to get there, but it's going to happen, right? Like, I intend to use it for years, and I'm certain going to have bad cells. As you said, there are extra cells, and we'll talk about that. But, you know, for an enterprise drive, I don't think I would buy a TLC at this point. There are technologies on the horizon that will make it possible to do this, but for now, I would stick on your enterprise stuff with MLC. And you can see the comparatively, like here's the previous 50 microseconds, 6 to 900, and then 900 to 1300. It's slower. It's kind of a linear path down. All right, fine.
Second right time, my God.
Yeah. But you know how fast that is compared to spinning disk? like you look at that, you're like, that's the ghetto of solid state. And then you compare it to a spinning disk, and you're like, oh, never mind. All right, so how are we doing here? We have 5 minutes before. I'm going to let you guys go early. Not yet, but in like 5 minutes. Because we're up here, and it sucks to go down there, and all the good snacks are taken. So if I go over, let me know. I have an alarm set, but I don't trust it. Right amplification and garbage collection. Yeah. This is a really hard section to talk to you about. And really because so much of it is implementation specific. Solid state drives are little black boxes, both literally and figuratively, because so much of the drive resides in the controller, in the software that powers it. And so I can give you, I'm going to, an overview level of how the garbage collection works and the way that it cleans up after itself and kind of that. But I can't talk to you about the scheduling. And I can't talk to you about how aggressive it is, and I can't talk to you about all of the things that really matter in the performance of your drive, right? Because all of those things are so implementation specific. The controller manufacturers have so many different ways of doing it that I don't know what they are, and neither does really anybody else. And I'll show you that too. So block sizes. We talked about the read size, right, which is this little tiny blue block over here all by itself, and the write block. And this is, if you look at it, that as a 4K block, this is a 256K write or erasure block. That's actually small. A lot of drives have a much bigger erasure block size than 256. So it doesn't really map to the whole way that we've kind of thought of. Like you're used to considering like your file system block sizes and your need to align them and stuff like that to a 4K block. But there's a lot more complexity in terms of the on-disk geometry here that we're going to have to take into account. And we have this thing called write amplification because you can't write to a single 4K block. You have to write to the big square. So consider a 1 meg solid state drive like this, okay? And we're the controllers. So we have this block that's completely full of data. Somebody wrote an entire 256K chunk of information, and they had a little bit of overspill. All right, and what we want to do is we want to change one of the blocks in that particular section there. So if you were on a spinning disk, what you do is you just change it, and it would be over. But we can't do that because we can't rewrite that without doing something special. So we're going to mark that as unused. First we're going to read it, and then we're going to mark it as unused. Change it in memory, and then write the changed data to a free cell. Okay? Now, over time, this gets a little hairy. Because here we've got old data, here we've got new data. There's been new data written, and now we've got this. We have to put this somewhere. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, we could do either here or here, because that's almost the same, but you know what? We're not using this anyway. If you don't have trim, and I'll talk about this, but just assuming the drive is dumb and the OS is dumb, it's going to read that, and it's going to rewrite it. Okay? Even though it's not really using it, it's like, yeah, we move this, whatever. We're going to write the new data here, and we're going to basically append it in memory. Now, it did not just leave that there and write those. It actually read those and then wrote all of this entire thing. Okay? That is why it's slow, because every single time it's got to reread and rewrite the entire chunk, right? The entire erasure block. If you have trim and you have this old data sitting around, the drive will actually say, oh, well, that's unused, and I know it's unused, so I'm going to erase it and not write it. So our capacity has improved, but not the fact that it takes a long damn time to do this because it's a whole bunch of steps.
But at least you don't have to reread the unused data first.
In that case, yes, that's true. if you've got a block that doesn't have data that you care about, it will just erase it and then overwrite it. Anybody have a Kindle? Like an e-ink Kindle? Okay, so if you've ever seen one, and I wish I brought mine, they've got a really interesting kind of way of changing the stuff on the screen. If you hit the next page, the entire thing goes blank, and then some of the data turns back on, right? And that's how it does the page flips. That's actually kind of analogous to how SSDs write and rewrite. Hey, it's break time. All right, so you guys have until, you can come back at 3:30, I think, is when the class is over. So thanks for your attention so far, and I hope to see you. But I won't be offended if you leave, I want you to come back. I want to show you more, but. Okay, so for whoever is editing this video later, hi, we're back. Okay, cool.
Look at this, Clyde. Welcome to the past.
I need the clapper. All right, good to go. Let's see, it's 3:30. Just so I can give myself some kind of target, class is going to be over at 5. So, and at 5 we have ice cream social. So I'm going to let you guys go early. Completely not to mention the fact that we're going to be done talking before then, but that way you're first in line for the ice cream. Okay, so we actually covered this, but it's close enough to where we ended that I'll do it for Evan's sake here. And to remind everybody, you're welcome. So as a reminder, the smallest block size we can deal with is a 4K block, and the smallest erasure block, the smallest amount we can write is a large multiple of that. In the case of our imaginary drive, 256K. In real life, it's like a meg in some cases. We have to deal with write amplification because of the way that it does that, right? So it can't just rewrite it. It has to actually mark it as old and write it someplace else. Write amplification. Right, okay, I think this is actually where we were, so that's great. So we've got this set up here where we've got this full block, this old data, this newer data, and this data over here. But we've got that data that needs to go on, and we're the controller, so we've got to decide where to put it. These have equal amounts of data in them, but that is old data according to, in this case, we'll say it's the file system. So what we're going to do is if we do not have trim, we're going to read that data in memory, add the new data to that chunk of memory, and then write all of it at once. It makes things go slow because you have to read and write and rewrite. And then if you do have trim, you can just, it knows that it's gone.
Is that why you're not supposed to defrag SSDs?
There are a lot of reasons. So in essence, yes, simplistically, yes. Think about what you're doing when you're defragmenting a spinning disk, right? So you've got a platter and you have data on multiple tracks and multiple areas of the disk. And part of the problem with the performance that really badly fragmented data incurs is the performance penalty of seeking to wherever the data is. So if you can clump the data together so that the head doesn't have to move nearly as much, you get a much better performance profile. And with solid state, that's completely abstracted away. That the requirement to have the head go seek the data here and then here isn't a problem. In fact, random versus linear has almost no performance change. It does, but not nearly as big as it does in a spinning disk. So there's no need to defragment a drive because it's inherently defragmented by the controller itself. I keep losing my little clicker guy. So, yeah.
Actually, so what happens with trim again? So basically, like, you without trim, you're taking the changes just to the particular read blocks and then applying, it entirely.
Sure.
Ratio, right? So what happens with, I guess?
Okay. So, how much do you know about file systems? Okay, so with Linux, for instance, is that what you're most familiar with? Okay, cool. So with Linux, if you have a file, you have the entry in the file system, right? And how do you delete that file? Do you delete the entirety of the file, or do you just delete the head, which then has the data structure that points to the rest of the data? So you're not actually erasing the inodes, right? You're erasing the pointer to the inodes, with the understanding that the file system won't reference those inodes until it needs them. And when it needs them, it knows they're free because there's nothing pointing to them anymore. Excuse me. So there is an abstraction layer between the flash that is actually storing and the logical block addresses that the file system knows about. And we're going to talk about that. But essentially, whenever you delete that, the file system says, okay, I know those blocks are available, but the solid state drive doesn't. Okay? All it knows is that your file system is requesting to read and write certain LBA addresses. And the flash translation layer that we'll talk about is converting those. So it sees that data as not really touchable, right? So it's got to kind of work around that. Trim is a way of moving that, hey, I'm not using that data information, right? So that the file system knows I'm not using this data. Trim is a way of converting that into language with a command on the bus that the flash drive says, oh, okay, I know you're not using that, so I'm going to mark this as bad, and I'll be able to rewrite it whenever I want. So it's going to treat it like that, right? Without trim, and then with trim, it's going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, I know you don't need that, so I'm going to overwrite that, no problem. So it's passing the information, these blocks aren't used, from the file system to the underlying flash device.
Communicating intent.
Yeah. Yeah, they agree on what data is used, what data is not, because otherwise there's no knowledge. The flash drive doesn't have any understanding of file systems or anything like that. All it knows is blocks, and that's a way of getting that information down there, which is also why, and we'll talk about this, but most RAID solutions, most software RAID solutions don't actually do that. They don't translate the trim command. So garbage collection. Yeah, okay. So here's a problem, right? We have our 1 megabyte solid state drive, and we are the flash controller, and I'm just going to trip over everything in the room because I'm awesome like that. So we want to free up some space, all right? So let's figure out what we can do. We've got these blocks of used data, that's empty, and this. So, all right, what do we do? We've got that old data that we would like to get rid of, and we would like some free space to write new stuff. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to move this down here into these blocks, right? Because we can read any of these little tiny blocks individually, but we can only write that big giant chunk. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read this into memory. We're going to read this into memory. We're going to combine the two, and then we're going to write them again. Really? Hey, you. Oh, hey. Ah. So what you see here is we've written them all, and then we can erase that after the data is committed. Okay? So it involved several distinct I/O operations. Now, garbage collection typically runs in the background, and this is very controller specific, but it will try to, generally speaking, find a time when the disk isn't overly used so that the I/O that it's doing won't adversely impact the performance of the drive when you need it. So that all these things kind of happen in the background. Right, so that should be pretty clear how that works. Any questions about the movement of the data or the stupid mini steps that it requires to do that? Because it.
And one presumes that you don't have to do an actual defragmentation on an SSD because you no longer care about contiguous files when random access is the same as linear access.
Exactly.
And what you do care about is having fully erased right-sized blocks available for writing.
Yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately, so in an ideal world, what you would actually do in your file system is you would make the file system block size equivalent to the erasure block size.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, that makes perfect sense, except that the erasure block size is like a megabyte. So if you're writing a 64K file, you're using a meg, right? And that's why we don't do that, because SSDs are of limited capacity right now. Maybe in the future, when we have terabyte drives, it would not be a bad idea to make the erasure block and the file block size aligned. It would fix performance really quickly, but you know, we're not there yet, sadly. Let's talk about some different things. Spinning disk, remember, linear is fast because the head doesn't have to move. All you have to do is feed it the next block, which is generally right in front of it. Random is slow because of all of the alignment that has to happen with the arms. Read is marginally faster than write. It's because of things like parity and the CRC stuff. With SSDs, reads are very fast. Reads are on flash chips are not actually as fast as they are with SSDs, and we'll talk about why, because the writes are distributed. But the writes or the reads are fast, stunningly fast compared to a spinning disk, and writes are slowish because of the way that we talked about, right? Like it's got to write an entire block, and then it may have to deal with other stuff that's already existing there, and whether or not it's random or linear, it really doesn't matter. It's just a table lookup in memory. One of the interesting things that I found with SSDs was that as capacity increases, so does performance. And I thought, well, that's really weird, but it turns out that it's a function of the way that the controller addresses things and the way that it splits it out. So the processors are in modern SSDs are ridiculously powerful. I mean, like, quad-core, ridiculously powerful. Enterprise SSDs have insane processors in them that are bursty use, and man, they fly when they need to. And lots and lots of memory, lots and lots of CPU power, and honestly, lots of buses. And what it will do is it will actually distribute the writes among many buses, and then have multiple chips per bus, so that you basically get RAID striping across all the chips, and that is why it's so fast. Because the individual chip writes aren't really that fast. It's just that you're doing it so many times at once. Now, you're still bound by the whole data path. You're going to have contention for the chips, right? Because there's a limited number of operations per chip at the same time, limited number of buses, and the buses are not magic. They have a certain amount of capacity, and also how used has your drive been? Has it been in service for a long time? Did you use it as a read-write cache? Things like that are going to affect whether or not the performance is as good as it was. And people see over time a kind of gradual decline in terms of performance, just because you have more contention in terms of the blocks that you have to deal with. Like you're constantly needing to do what we did with the garbage collection. Sometimes you find yourself needing to do it live, and that slows down writes because it won't actually commit and acknowledge the write until it's done. Yeah. So like I said, basically it's a game of throw as many chips on as you can and still get the capacity, right? So you want to use a bunch of smaller chips rather than a couple really big chips because your performance is going to be better. The more buses, the better. Basically, how many things can you use? And that's why they have quad-core CPUs, right? Like these things are pushing some significant data, especially when you consider what we were doing with spinning disks. So it's really no surprise that we're throwing cheap CPU at them, because now really nice CPU is cheap. I really hate this thing, and I've got to get a new one. Yeah, so causes of contention, right? Legitimate use, even if you don't know that the legitimate use is there. So anybody have UpdateDB running in a cron job? UpdateDB? So UpdateDB is a service. Yeah, like UpdateDB runs on Linux, and it basically refreshes the a database of the entire file system, so that if you need to locate something, you could run locate instead of find /- file name. It's way faster. But if you have jobs that require a certain amount of I/O while that's happening, sorry, right? Like you're reading all kinds of metadata. You're walking the entire tree, and your I/O performance sucks while it's doing that. Now, is that legitimate usage. I mean, kind of, right? But we didn't really want it to be going while our database backups were happening. It just was. So whenever you see really bad performance and it's cyclical, kind of look for things like that. Garbage collection, right? The drive, and this is so dependent on the controller, but the drive may be like, hey, I think now's a good time to garbage collect, even though you're like, I would really like to be updating my website or, updating MySQL, something like that. And the I/O blender, which is responsible for this absolutely beautiful picture. This is actually on a t-shirt. If you go to that URL, you can order the Bender blender. It's at Threadless, or it's a Threadless shirt. I just love that picture. So the I/O blender is really pretty funny. And we see it a lot with RAID arrays, but it's a valid concern for an individual drive too if you have enough going on. So the original idea for the I/O blender is, suppose you have an array, right, a spinning disk array that's optimized for linear reads, okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to arrange your storage so that everything is on the outside of the disks, right? And everything is kind of in a straight line, and it absolutely flies. And you have one thing going, and it's like, wow, that's fast, right? Also, you're like, okay, it's got great performance. I'm gonna throw some more at it. So now you've got two things going, and it's like, wow, that's pretty fast. The more things you throw at it, the more to the actual storage system, it starts to look like random I/O. Multiple concurrent linear accesses look like random I/O because the disks are fighting over the locations which are varying on disk. Right? So you still have the same problem of the head seeking and stuff like that. It is not as much of a problem, but it does happen, right? And it's particularly noticeable on the buses. So
Does that sort of depend on how you configured read ahead, things like that?
Yeah, it's dependent on a lot of things. It's basically how many separate things do you have accessing as if they were the only thing accessing, and that's the ultimate cause of this. Everybody thinks.
Dedicated volumes.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's actually a feature in the VMware document. Because virtualization just destroys your I/O.
Oh, man.
Right? Because there are so many different workloads doing so many different things at the same time.
Yeah.
Blender.
And if you're familiar with VDI, virtual desktop, yeah, oh my God, like that is the crucible by which storage systems are judged. It's like, okay, well, it's 8 in the morning and kids need to go to school, so let's turn on 75,000 machines. Like, oh, well, what could possibly go wrong?
It's like random square.
It's terrible. It's just bad. It's ugly. You say VDI and some people twitch. Yeah, so bus speed, right? Like, we're not using Magic buses. This isn't the Magic School Bus. They have a particular speed that they can feed at. And for SATA, that's 3 or 6, right? And SAS is also limited, right? With spinning disks, that's not really a problem. With a spinning disk, what's the max throughput on a spinning disk at 15K? Like 130, 140?
Yeah,
150 tops.
Yeah, like 150 megabytes a second, right, tops. And a solid state drive goes way faster. So if you have an array of spinning disks, all operating at their max theoretical throughput, it's like, one SSD. And people who build arrays are like, well, these are just hard drives that go fast. We're going to shove a bunch in. Who thought that was a good idea? No. So watch out whenever you're looking at whatever kind of storage solution you're implementing, whether you're building it or whether you're buying it from somebody else. The person you're buying it from might be an idiot. So just
ask them how many SSDs you can put in a single shelf, and if they tell you all of them, then they're probably not.
yeah, right. And you're doing that over 1 6 gig SAS cable? Yeah. Oh well, okay then. Thanks.
Yeah, the better companies will tell you that you can put a bunch of fiber channel drives in or a bunch of SAS drives in, but you can only put 5 or 7 or whatever SSDs in a particular shelf.
Yeah, and there's a real reason for that. It's not just because they want to sell you more shelves. It's like there's a real reason.
Sorry, so I missed the reason for that is that the speed of those 5 or 6 drives will way surpass the bus speed?
Yes.
Okay.
By far.
At which point you're spending money on bandwidth out of the drives that you can't use.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, like right now, on pretty much any I/O test, and I have a screenshot of one here later, you're going to see 500 megabytes a second out of a an SSD, and that's not because all of them plateau at 500 megabytes. It's because that's all you're going to get out of the bus, man. Because you figure that's 500 megabytes a second, and you multiply that by 8, and you come out to pretty close to the theoretical maximum of the bus minus the protocol overhead, right? Like the screenshot I have, I think, is 519. Like that.
That's close.
Yeah, I mean, like that's what you're going to get, and until we get the next generation of buses, or you start using PCIe buses. I mean, like you're limited, and anybody who tries to tell you that their solution is going to fix that is lying to you, because it's not.
Now, are you saying that's on a single consumer or enterprise grade SSD that you're going to see?
Some consumer models are actually really good. They're like I said, the way that they do that is by using cheaper chips and just more of them. When a while back, I mean, like the only SSDs you could get were like the 2.5, and now they have 3.25 SSDs that have I'm not going to use that word, a lot of chips in them and a lot of buses, because they want to parallelize all the things, including the chips and the buses. So I mean, like it's just a crazy world out there, and you've got to kind of understand what they're doing. So if you look at the sales sheets, you'll see the companies that list capacity and the companies that list price and the companies that list performance. And the higher the capacity, it's like a straight line. The higher the capacity, the higher the performance, and the more it costs, right? Because they're using more chips and to increase the capacity, unless they're using bigger chips, and then you see the price go up, but the performance doesn't, even though the capacity does. And that's because they're using fewer, bigger chips. So, keep in mind what you're actually buying for.
So what you're telling me is that when a vendor who shall not be named tells me that I can SSD all the things on the shelf, they're completely lying.
Depends on how many things are on the shelf. If you have a very small shelf,
It's a decent sized shelf.
do the math.
Yeah, I mean we did, and it's like this isn't even possible.
Well, you have to be careful too, because I mean, if the vendor knows what they're doing, they can fix the problem, right? There are all SSD disk shelves.
Oh, right.
That have
But this-
multiple SATA buses within them, and then they interconnect to the other shelves with things like InfiniBand.
Right.
So they're doing things to make sure that the bus is not the
But at
problem.
this price, they weren't doing such things.
Okay.
It just has to be a legit backplate, at least that has lots of buses.
Yeah, in high performance enterprise stuff, I've heard the word InfiniBand more times in the past 2 years than I have like talking to my friends who have been in HPC forever, because everybody's like, well, we need lower latency and more throughput, so we're going to use InfiniBand. And it's not like you have InfiniBand interfaces to your stuff, although you can. It's more like they have to attach the shelves with something, and we're all out of unicorn hair.
Yeah, something that's faster than 10 gig, because the servers are already talking 10 gig.
Yeah.
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 Okay, I hate to keep making the question.
No, no.
Let's see. So, I mean, when I started, the paradigm was, wow, we have these super crazy, awesome buses that can do all this data that we have nothing to match. So is the paradigm basically, 180 to where now we have these super awesome disks that these buses can't even handle inside all of these?
Well, basically, we can't even get CPU bound right now, unless we do special things to get the data there.
Okay.
Because, I mean, in 2013, CPU is almost free, right?
Right.
That's not me, right? Okay. CPU is almost free. Solid state disks have made I/O almost free.
Right.
So it's now the interconnect. How fast can you get your processor the data from the SSDs?
Right.
So you have to spend a lot of money to say Fusion I/O.
Yeah.
Pumping enough data into the.
Well, I mean, it's the fastest bus on the computer, right? PCIe is the fastest bus that you've got. And ironically enough, it's not really ironic, but it is interesting. I'm connected right now through my Thunderbolt connector.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody here who has a Mac has a Thunderbolt connector, I'm willing to bet. And a Thunderbolt connector looks like it might be a little tiny USB thing. No. No. A Thunderbolt is essentially a PCI extension bus. And you can get, I so want $1,000 because you can, you can get this $1,000 box that plugs into your Thunderbolt port. And in this box, it's basically PCI slots. And you put PCI cards, like, you want quad SLI on your Mac laptop? Sure. It's literally an extension out of the PCI bus. And then it's got another Thunderbolt port too, because it can go to the giant cinema display or whatever else you want to throw at it. Right? Do you want an array of fast SSDs? Okay. We'll just plug it into the Thunderbolt because it's a PCI. It's basically a PCI port.
By the way, you saw the news about Thunderbolt 2 the other day?
No. What's Thunderbolt?
I think Thunderbolt's by 10 gig.
Yeah, 20 gig.
No, it's 40. It's 40 if you listen to the marketing. Okay?
They're saying Thunderbolt 2 double.
Okay, that is awesome because that'll be real 40. The marketing material on Thunderbolt says 40 because it's 20 both ways. It's like that is. I've heard other people sell like that. Like it's 40
200 megabit up
Or-
internet. It's 100 each way.
each way, right? Like we know what you're doing. You're not selling us on full duplex, okay? You can't fool us like that. But yeah. So you have an incredibly powerful port right on the side of your laptop, and you're using it to plug in VGA. So.
That 200 meg commit on a 100 meg port.
Sure, right, yeah. It's 100 megs both way, right? I'll charge you double for that. That's fine. I don't feel bad about that. Okay, right. So back to the SSD stuff. Yeah, very fast. We talked about this. Reads cause no damage, right? So you can read, and it's not subject to the problem that we had earlier where we're actually injecting the charge in because it's not depositing anything. You're literally just sensing whether or not the electrons are outside of that bell curve. And as I mentioned, it scales up with capacity, which is great because they're getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Writes are usually fast, and the ability to use the SSD as a write cache is actually really cool. It's completely non-volatile, so as soon as you write, you can acknowledge because it's not going away if the power dies. And then at your leisure, you can write back to whatever. I was at a really cool demo the other day from SanDisk. And anybody here know that SanDisk does things besides crappy little CF cards?
They do crappy little SD cards.
They do, yeah, crappy little SD cards.
And SandForce SSD controllers.
They make SSD controllers, and they also make a really cool piece of software. So this software is their enterprise, one of their enterprise level products, and they have an enterprise division. I didn't know that. Listen to this. So what you can do is you can install this driver, and it's a kernel level driver. They have a Linux version, a Windows version, and a VMware version. You install this driver on your local machine that's running, whatever server you need, and then you throw an SSD in. Doesn't have to be theirs. You can throw any SSD in, and you configure this driver to use that as essentially an invisible SSD cache. So your file system doesn't need to know about it. You don't need to point anything at it. It's just this driver. And every write in the entire I/O chain goes to that disk. Okay? And it's using write through. So we talked about how write through is different than write back, but write through. So it won't actually acknowledge until it's on the remote side if it's a remote piece of media. So for VMware, if you're using an NFS data store, it will write to the SSD and to the remote side, and everything's cool because the remote side knows about the change. But whenever you go to read that data, it reads from the SSD, right? Completely eliminating the entire latency of going back to the NFS server and pulling the stuff from disk or whatever. Very, very cool.
Is that what those hybrid hard drives do?
Yeah, so that is the hybrid hard drives, the ones that are legitimately hybrid, are essentially a regular hard drive that looks like this, but you've got additional circuitry and a little SSD, basically like a small thumb drive kind of thing. And it writes there first because that's so much faster, and then it'll spin that to disk as it gets a chance.
So does that help read times at all?
Yes. Yeah. As long as it's a cache hit, right? As long as the data that you're looking for is in the SSD, it'll get pulled from there, and that actually will speed up writes too because it'll use a write back. It'll write to that.
Don't do massive linear writes.
Well, yeah. And actually, one of the cool RAID solutions that I've seen, I use at my work is a Nimble storage device. And there are a couple other people that kind of got smart and are doing this. So it's a block level storage, and all the I/O goes through the controller on this RAID array. And it's set up, it's a hybrid array with a bunch of spinning disks and a few SSDs. It is I/O Blender aware. So it knows when it's getting an I/O stream, right? Because it knows who the initiators are, basically, and what data set it's going to. And it will determine whether or not a write is random or linear. In either case, it'll get written to RAID 6, right, which is the spinning disks. But if it's random, it'll also get written to the SSDs as a form of read cache later. So that if you need to pull random I/O, say you're doing a lot of database I/O, it will know, okay, this is random I/O. I'm going to put it on the RAID 6, but I'm also going to put it on the SSDs, so that when you request to change that data, it happens very, very fast. Or you read from the data, rather, it happens very, very fast. It's a really interesting way to perform I/O, and it's pretty smart given the I/O performance difference between read and write on solid-state drives. I thought it was a creative solution. And there are actually companies coming out that use the SSDs for both read and write. They'll do write-back caching, so your writes happen very quickly, too. Just really interesting storage solutions coming out. The company that I have is Nimble Storage. And I would have to think about that. Starboard Storage is the one that I saw recently that does read-write onto the SSD, which, I mean, there are arguments for and against. I actually wrote a blog entry about them not too long ago that talked about what they were doing. I like, street lights, so it's like, this is cool, I'm going to do this. Green is very fast. Yellow is writes. Red, yeah, it's ugly. But with SSDs, hey, nothing's all that terrible. You just kind of have to watch out for writing, There's a caution. It's not as fast. So, practice. We kind of figured out how SSDs work on the back end. Let's talk about some of the ways that they're actually seen. So everybody has probably an entire desk drawer full of this crap, right? Like, is there anybody here who actually knows how many they have? Because, God, I don't. You really know how many SSDs or how many flash drives you have?
3.
You have 3 flash drives. You got one today or yesterday.
Okay, so now I have 4.
You could walk down the street and find them. By the way,
There's probably several in the parking lot if you wanted to pick it up and plug it into your laptop.
Yeah.
by the way, the coolest pen testing I've ever heard of in my entire life is to get little cheap flash drives, mark them with like a 64 gig logo, and drop them in a parking lot. Right? Put some malware on them, just leave them outside of a door of a company that you're interested in. Yeah. People will put those in computers because they like those. I'm just saying, be very careful if you find a flash drive on the ground.
Have you heard of the Chinese companies that are taking 4 gigs SanDisk and playing with the tables and saying that? So the OS says, hey, I have 64 gigs, and then you go to write, it says, where's my space?
I have heard anecdotes of companies doing that, where you have to take a very small flash, and it sounds very, very interesting to me, but they write it in a cyclical fashion, so it looks like it's continuing to write, but really it's just writing the last however much of the file exists. So it looks like 64 gigs, but it's actually like 128 megs, and sorry about your luck. I've heard stories like that. I've never seen one. Yeah, exactly. The story that I read was like, it was a movie, and he double-clicked to watch the movie, and it was like the credits. He's like, it's my movie. And he did it again, and it was the credits again, and they're like, wait, something's very wrong. And they took it apart, and it's really like a little SD card kind of thing with just wire. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
Kind of infuriating when you're trying to put like a Windows 7 bootable key on there and you're trying to copy like 4 gigs and you realize it just stops and freezes. It's like, oh, it's one of these big ones.
I've not encountered one myself.
I got hit by that.
Yikes. I'm sorry to hear that. You should totally buy your things from legitimate sources, whatever that is. eBay, yeah. Legitimate sources like eBay and Russian sites and.
Those Armenians from last night.
Yeah, the Armenian. Crafty Armenian. Every single IP in Armenia. That was hilarious. In addition, we have drives. Everybody knows about the drive form factor. What's really cool is that some enterprise flash array people are like, why are we still doing this? And they're actually making their own flash, what do they call them, nodes or flash, like they use some other word besides drive. But that's not necessarily a boring gray box. It's a different shaped boring gray box. I thought it was remarkable. PCI cards. So everybody that has a MacBook Air, that's your hard drive right there. You like that? Yeah, I had no idea. This is what solid state drives used to look like on PCIe. In some cases they still do, but it's basically like battery backed RAM that goes very, very, very fast. This is more what we see now. A card like that costs like as much as a car, basically, like 14,000.
No, you need Alexander's got one of his computer. How much was yours? $200.
For
PCIe card.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
What brand?
It's an OC. It looks like that card right there.
Like that one?
Yeah.
Oh,
I got
really?
it for his birthday. I think it was under $300. I know I didn't spend that much.
Really? What's the capacity?
240.
No kidding.
Yeah, and it's screaming fast.
I would be interested. Will you send me the model number for that? That'd be cool. Thanks. Because I'm going to be building a gaming rig in.
Oh yeah, that's the way to go.
I have 40 gigs worth of that stuff hooked up on Thunderbolt.
Yeah, I would love one of those actually. But the big ones that I know of that I have actually held in my hand, if you go to Lisa, every once in a while Texas Memory Systems will sponsor Lisa, and they brought one of their arrays, and this is like a 2U monster that's literally just full of really big versions of that card. And I mean, it was like advertised as the million IOP box. Like, you want a million IOPS, you drop a house on that, and there you go. But I held the card in my hand. I can't believe they let me. And I'm like, wow. And it was like $20,000. Yeah, it's. Cheese it. Really? I wonder what the performance I/O is. I mean, because that's interesting.
OCG,
Yeah.
up to 200,000 items.
Yeah. Right.
But it's PCIe too.
Huh. If you'd send me that, I'd be very interested. Because, I mean, why not, right?
Can you go back one?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry.
The top right, I think that's M7 SSD.
That guy, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's supposed to be for small form factor.
There,
The Ultra looks like that here.
there are a lot of people talking about putting those things, that port, on the front of servers. So you basically have modules that you can, to the front. You don't have to go into the hot aisle. You just plug in.
Yeah.
Almost like RAM, but not, but not. Yeah, no, it's interesting the ways that they're finding to do that. So that's what the interfaces look like if you've never opened up your computer, and I find that grossly unlikely.
It's in your tweet screen.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so like I said before, SATA, SAS, it's really the same connector. They plug into the same thing. Just, one's better. So you're going to see a series of things that I'm very proud of because I drew them by hand. So you're going to suffer every one of them. Right, so this is a very simplistic diagram of how the controller part works, right? We've got the CPU, we've got buses coming out, we've got the RAM cache because it has a RAM cache, because it makes things faster, and the battery supercapacitor, which we talked about earlier. It used to be with the spinning disks, you couldn't power the drive long enough to write everything to disk. So one of the tricks that RAID arrays would do would be to disable the controller cache, because you can't guarantee a write, and if the drive has the cache set up, it's going to be like, yeah, I've got that, because it wants to make it go faster, but it doesn't really have that. You lose power and it dies. That's the reason that a lot of the drive arrays, if they lose battery power, turn off the cache, right? Because they're like, well, if it dies, we don't want to lose data. So performance is going to suck until you fix it. With that, there's enough power in that supercapacitor to write everything in memory to flash. right? So you don't have to worry about power outage, it will do it. Not every drive has it. The consumer level stuff probably doesn't, either because of the part cost or the cost of programming the whatever, or they just want to sell enterprise drives for more, you know. They're all valid, options. And here we see the real difference between a really cheap thumb drive and an actual SSD, because that's a question a lot of people ask me. Like, why would I buy an SSD that's 128 gigs or, you know, a 64 gig thumb drive when the 64 gig thumb drive is like a quarter of the cost? And that's what you're paying for, right? Like all the other stuff that's not just chips. I talked about how the more chips you have, the better the performance is, and you can see here, if it's going to stripe across every drive, you're obviously going to get a lot better performance here than you would there, even with USB 3. Plus, the controller or the processor, way more sophisticated. As far as I know, there's no garbage collection on the chips in the SSD or on the thumb drive. I don't think there is. I know there's no trim support because it's USB, and trim is a bus level command, right? It's only over the SATA-SAS, and actually they backported it to IDE. So if you do have an IDE, yeah, they make IDE SSDs. Oh yeah. Factories. I mean, think about the kind of machines that you would have that are still using machines that would have IDE, right?
Yeah.
Or medical, maybe.
Yeah, maybe medical. Things that are not very, or are very resistant to change, right? Isolated systems that need to be reliable and apparently want faster access to their images.
And as we saw earlier, you can get away from spinning metal and you have something that vibrates as a part of its operation.
Right.
SSD is a huge win.
Yeah. No, that's true too. I didn't think of
You
that.
can't buy an IDE drive, maybe. So you get an SD drive.
I mean, that could be. I don't know. I think you could probably still buy IDE drives if you were motivated.
Spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
We'll make it an ID drive.
Right. We'll throw a different bus on, or a different interface on it and charge you unbelievable amounts of money.
It's like Grand Parallel Port zip drive.
Yeah, like I remember they made them, but like I don't want one. Okay, so the controllers themselves, here's what they do, right? We have the flash translation layer. They stripe the writes across the chips. They interpret the bus instructions. They are responsible for wear leveling. So wear leveling goes hand in hand with the striping. If your goal is to write as fast as possible, you're going to spread it out to as many devices as possible. Also, if you are going to damage the media every time you write to it, you want to write to each individual bit of media as infrequently as possible. You can accomplish both of those by spreading the writes across as many chips as possible and doing as few operations on one particular chip as possible. And that's what that's all about. And then the garbage collection cleans up after the horribly inefficient those things has completed. And this is the translation layer that we've talked about, right? So we have the LBA up here. So that's the only thing your computer knows about. That's the only thing your computer really cares about is what LBA address am I reading or writing from. The controller, though, because it needs to move data around in order to make things fast and to do the wear leveling, it has to abstract that. It can't have a one-to-one tie between blocks that you know about and blocks that it knows about. And there's really no way to pass the information on where in the chips the writes go. Yeah?
So I'm not familiar with LBA.
Logical block addressing.
Okay, so that's basically the name of a particular block it's reading, right?
So it's a number that it's written to. So do you remember back in the day we had cylinder head sector addresses? And you can actually, if you fdisk something, you'll still see a reference to it.
Yeah, there's only
They make up some numbers for you.
Yeah. You've got 6,000 heads. Oh, great. Okay, cool. Okay, so LBA came after that as a way to make it a linear address space as opposed to the screw-up mess that it was before. And we still use it. The only problem is that with SSDs, you know, it's completely separate from any physical address, right? The physical address that are identifying where the data lives right now is looked up in a table by the flash translation layer whenever the computer says, hey, I want LBA block 25. the computer's like, LBA block 25, go. And the flash translation layer is like, oh, let me look up where I put that. Oh, it's on these 15 chips. Okay, cool. And then when you rewrite it, it's like, well, I've already used those 15 chips. I'm going to write to these chips over here. And it just updates the table. Your computer still thinks it's the same LBA block, but now the flash translation layer is like, oh, well, I've got to go find these over here. And that's why the big problem comes in with trim, right? Because your computer is like, hey, I'm going to delete this file in the file system. And in the file system, the head gets deleted, right? And the other blocks that were being used by that file just aren't pointed to by anything. And it's cool with that, but nothing has ever told anything down here that those are unused blocks. So it's like, I'm not going to overwrite those, right? So they're just going to kind of be sitting around and stuff. So you need to be able to remove that so your drive doesn't unnecessarily fill up early and cause bad things to happen. So that's what that's all about. Are we cool there?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. Any other questions about?
Wait till the end to have one, don't wait till the
Okay, that's fair. I'll just be scared until then. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Actually, so.
Oh, you.
Yep. The enterprise SSDs tend to have more chips sometimes than consumer, partly for purposes of wear leveling. Does that answer help more?
So the things that really separate enterprise drives are generally, and I'm leaving out crazy new startups here, okay? Because crazy new startups are crazy. Generally, the things that sorry? Yeah.
Crazy new startup, enterprise.
They sell themselves as enterprise. They really they're like, yeah, we're fine. We've never seen a drive failure. And I'm like, really? And they're like, really?
3 months. How little do they use it?
I off camera, I will talk to you guys. So the thing that really separates it is, right, they don't use the cheap chips, okay? So your write count is going to be higher because your pieces of doped silicon are bigger, right? So your dot pitch, if you want to think of it like that, is larger. The EMLC, yeah. Right, they're going to use EMLC, which is a more reliable method of determining and writing. And
They do the over-provisioning, right?
yeah, the capacity. So if you guys have ever shopped for an SSD, you'll notice that they're in really weird sizes. So like 120 gigs or 250 gigs, and you're like, that's not a power of 2. I mean, it's almost a power of 2, but it's really not. And being in the computer field, you're like, things go in powers of 2. Why don't these? Actually, they're lying to you. They do come in powers of 2, but the controller is set to not show you whatever is missing out of that power of 2. So in a 128 gig drive, it's only going to show you 120 gigs. And then that 8 gig is going to be unused chips. And when I say unused chips, I don't mean like nothing ever gets written to those. What I mean is that it's not going to report that size to you so that you can save the writes that you would otherwise fill those with. So it's a really hard kind of thing to explain.
Well, eventually a block becomes unwritable because one of the cells in it is unwritable.
Yeah.
And then it's marked as unusable, and you use a block out of your spare.
No. That's totally not how it happens. That's how it happens with a hard drive, with a spinning disk. If you have a bad block with a spinning disk, you've got this reserve set of blocks, right? You say, oh, I've got a bad sector. I'm going to pull from this sector over here now whenever that sector is addressed. With solid state, that's not how it works. So suppose we have a solid state drive. Let's see, what am I going to do here? We'll pretend that it's a 9 gig solid state drive. Each one of these is a 1 gig chip. The only thing is we want to save as many writes as possible. So we're going to say it's an 8 gig, okay? So what happens when the first writes come along? Well, because of the wear leveling and because of the performance spreading, we're going to write across those chips, right? Now, you might think, like with hard drives, that would be a spare, but it's not. It gets written to as well, okay? And the reason for that is because if you leave that as a spare, you don't get the performance. Now, you might think, okay, you're ruining it though. You're gonna make it erase. But what you're actually doing is you're over the lifetime of that drive, you're writing less, necessarily because the capacity is less, right? So if you do the math, it does come out that you end up writing less because you're lying about because it's lying about the amount of capacity that you have to write. So if you fill that drive up 10 times,
Or
right?
if you fill it up once, it's still 1/9 empty.
Yes.
Is part of that also the overhead of the translation table and things like that?
That's more performance than anything.
Okay.
Just because.
I mean, is the translation table part of the hidden space?
So I mean, it has to be, right? But
Yeah.
So why don't you just buy a bigger drive and not use it as much?
Yeah,
because people are very concerned about longevity, and if they take 1/9 of the drive out, they can extend the announced lifetime of the drive to longer.
So if I buy the 200 drive and I only use 100 of that, inherently that would be better than a 9 used at
Yes,
half.
absolutely. So,
So it's marketing speak?
well, no, it's legitimately extending the life, but it's basically preventing you from filling up the entire drive every time, because it's reserving that for extra lifetime. And Jacob's completely right. With spinning disks, you can short stroke it and get extra performance out of it, right? Because you're only writing on the outside. But because SSDs are entirely abstracted away, what if you told your file system only to use half of it, right? Because it's completely abstracted, you're using half the capacity, but it's still spreading the writes across every disk, which means,
Every chip, yeah.
yeah, or across every chip, thank you.
So you're essentially cutting the number of writes on each chip in half.
Yes.
in that scenario,
And you're extending the life by twice.
by cutting them.
Yeah,
So you mean you bought a 240 or whatever and you only partition it out to half?
sure.
So,
Or partition it to 200. And then you not only have the 40, you also have the other 16 to make it 256.
Well, and remember, if this is an MLC and you're going to get 1,000 write cycles,
3,000 with that.
well,
An MLC is about 3,000.
okay, you can get 3,000. So if you fully wipe the drive and then refill it every day, you'll only get 9 years ish out of it.
I don't remember. Yeah.
Some
It-
number that's longer than you'll keep the computer.
Yeah. It is possible to wipe out a drive, right? But it's typically going to come in enterprise settings when you're using it as a write cache, because you're constantly rewriting, and it's doing garbage collection in order to let you have more space to rewrite. Your performance will go down. So what I recommend to people is that you treat it like race car tires, okay? If you're going to use it as a cache on a heavily hit machine, use it for a while and then get new ones, right? Like for an enterprise, what's an enterprise SSD cost compared to buying enough spinning disks to make that kind of performance difference? I mean, it's not even. It's
And in 2 years, the new one's going to be faster
and bigger. Yeah, I mean,
how can you monitor this?
how can you monitor this? Indeed, did that work? I don't know if it indeed works there.
It works.
Okay, so smart, basically, on an individual drive, smart. But we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. I might have missed this while I was out. I'm sorry. Where's bad block remapping come into play?
Where's what come in?
Bad block remapping.
Define bad block in this case.
You can't write to it anymore.
Yeah, I mean like in
But how do you know what a bad block is? How does your OS know what a bad block is?
your OS doesn't.
You'll never have a bad block.
The
Well,
the SSD management does. Your OS has no idea what's bad enough.
Right. So your hard drive has decided what's bad, right?
It just didn't tell you.
And it didn't tell you because it's pulling from another block somewhere else.
Right, but if you say that 8 gigs or whatever that
Mhm.
space that it just doesn't tell you about is actually still being written to, what do you use to remap bad blocks to?
Well, there's no remapping, you just don't use it.
Exactly.
And your amount of reserve space goes down.
The FTL just doesn't put stuff there.
So will your OS tell you that your capacity is now less?
No.
Well,
Because
Smart
your
tell you
capacity
your
is
reserve is going away.
Yeah. You need to check the smart fields for the drive.
That sounds like a good one.
But essentially, you don't have to worry about a bad block being written to because the SDL or the flash translation layer knows what's good and bad and will just not feed bad or will not feed data to bad blocks, right? Like if a cell has reached its maximum point and it can't be read from, it just won't get written to. It's taken out of the table.
Which means that whole block.
That whole 1 meg chunk of stuff goes away.
It's now no good.
Right.
Because of one cell in there?
Well, you got to figure if with wear leveling, if you lose one cell, they're
There's probably
probably
a
all
button.
right there at the tipping point.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it is a completely weird, bizarre world compared to everything we're used to. And that's really what made me want to teach this class, because I'm like, I have to tell other people about how fucking weird this is. Like, it's just not normal.
You drive across the country with a case of beer in the trunk. You take the first beer out in the summertime, and you think, this tastes kind of skanky. You got to figure the rest of the case is just about there, too.
You're not wrong. Okay. Any other questions about how that works? Okay, cool. So aspects and concerns. How am I on time? We have half an hour? Yeah, we're so going to be done early. That's okay. Longevity, right? Everybody's really concerned about drives wearing out. And hopefully I can convince you that you don't really need to worry about it, especially for your desktop. Yeah.
Okay, really quickly, so is it really, like, do you really have to concern yourself? Like, is it just like, yeah, this might have a little bit shorter of life, but I'm probably going to toss this out for the best thing, a year or 2 years later, so I can just deal with it.
So I lean more towards that, the second one, because for my personal machine, I really don't want the drive to die, especially in my Air where I can't put another one in and like RAID 0 or RAID 1 them, not RAID 0. God, somebody hit me later. So yeah, like I can't RAID 1 my Air, but I can run Time Machine. And everybody should, because if your desktop drive dies because of maybe the writes run out, or maybe and this is far more likely statistically, the people who wrote the controller screwed up and your drive is bricked, which statistically speaking has been far more common, right? Because of how. Yeah, exactly. This is an entirely new technology, right? And even after a few years, every once in a while, like a SandForce controller will just, hit Tom's Hardware like, hey, every drive that has this controller died at 3 o'clock last night. Boy, isn't that weird. Well, sorry. So that's way more likely than running out of flash writes. Yeah.
Because every time you're going to you're going to run out of flash writes and it's going to be worthless. And
No.
It's like, is that even a problem?
No, it's not been a problem for anybody that I've known, right? Especially not for a desktop.
People putting them in, business desktops, and they say, I put SSDs in 5 years ago. We haven't had one fail. That's every day running for 8 hours.
Yeah, if you're doing a 5-year depreciation schedule, and you haven't hit.
PC that by then. You need a new PC.
So I have this guy, I think it's, actually I got 768 in it. But I've written, my whole iTunes library into it. That's sitting there. It's not being written to.
Right.
Is that just data or does it move data around in order to wear level?
So there are
Every 3 months should I move my iTunes library to a different place?
not at all.
Or is it smart?
It is smart. So we earlier you saw how it looked like pits, right? Like there are doped pits, and it writes and then reads, and okay. As it turns out, that over time electrons can leak out, and that's a known problem. So what the controller does is scrub the data. Okay, just like with a magnetic disk, over time the charge can change either because of magnetic events or because the next track over the disk vibrated a little bit and it overwrote a little bit, and now it's kind of like, well, I'm not really sure. So it scrubs the data every once in a while. Same thing with SSDs. It will, over the course of the garbage collection, rewrite the data so that it's freshly charged, right? So it's full. Which is another reason you don't want to leave your flash drives on your desk for months, because those are the cheapest chips that you can buy. Like, don't trust that to data that you care about, because it will go away over time. And with flash, it's like a year-ish. So,
With flash, with SSDs, it's like,
with SSDs that are plugged in, don't worry about it.
if they're not plugged in, is that what?
Like
the
about a
next
year.
question?
Like about a year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So don't put
So-
SSDs are not for archival storage.
No, SSDs are not for archival storage, and SLC should last longer than MLC, or TLC, because there are far fewer charge levels to differentiate between, and so a little bit of electron leakage will cause less of damage to that cell than in the one where it's got to differentiate 8 different states.
So can you explain why there's archival flash media out there?
So flash media that is meant for shelf life for years.
Yeah.
I assume they use a different kind of electron storage
Okay.
rather than the kind. I don't know if NOR flash does that or not. Do you?
I didn't know there was archival flash.
I didn't either.
I
hadn't
looked at
seen
it,
it.
like,
Maybe it's like battery backed up.
Maybe.
Something to keep it fresh.
Send me a link on it.
Everybody would spend
yeah, I
money
saw
on
it somewhere and I was like, what?
So if you send me a link on it, I'll read about it and try to find out, because I'm interested too.
No, you're right.
But yeah, no, the flash that you buy, don't leave your drive staying around and hope for the data to be there. Okay, like a year-ish is I think what they're about rated for.
Don't count on your pictures being there left on the card with the camera.
Not for an over long period of time, yeah, because the controllers in those don't even have scrubbing, right? So. Yeah, so we talked about short stroking and how it affects lifetime, not speed, and how we're lied to, I say, by drive people. I don't know if that thing goes to sleep or not. Okay, so now the dirty little thing that everybody doesn't want to talk about. Do you guys go to efforts to make sure your partitions are aligned? Anybody? Anybody go to any length to make sure your partitions are aligned? Shame on every one of you except you. You're okay. Okay.
I've heard of this for database stuff.
Oh,
Big issue with the
my heart. It hurts. Okay. So,
What do you mean, flash doesn't just make that go away too?
it's like the cloud. You align it to the cloud and everything's fine. All right. Okay. So, okay. Yeah, no kidding. All right. So here's the deal, right? I want black, like my heart. Turns out all I can get is orange. Damn. Okay. Brown's the new black. So we have a disk, say, right? Is that the right way to do this? Let's do this linear. And that goes on. Okay, so this is a disk. This is an old style disk. Each one of these blocks, 512 bytes. You can't see that, but trust me, it says 512. Anybody happen to know how big the partition table size is? Not the partition, but the partition table size on disk that records how big the partition table is. Like the amount of storage it takes up on disk. Turns out it takes up 512 because that's what it fits in. It fits in one of these little blocks. So on a hard drive, on the hard drive that came on my IBM Aptiva 486 DX266, the first computer I ever owned, that hard drive had 512 byte blocks, and the MBR took up the first one. Okay, so when I went to install Linux, the very first time I said, I want to install Linux. Okay, I want to use the first unused block. And it was like, okay, cool. Here we go. You start here, right? The first unused block, which is actually the second block because of the MBR. Okay? Now, what did you want your partition block size or your file block size to be? Well, it didn't really matter because nothing is going to go smaller than 512. Now, though, we live in the modern world where block sizes on disk are 4K. Okay? Block sizes being 4K have screwed up everything when it comes to partition alignment. So you still have 500, MBRs are still the same size, right? So they still take like that.
Part of the first block.
Part of the first block. And then, so then you're like, okay, well, I want to create whatever. And what you do is you create, say, 4K blocks. Okay, cool. And we're going to use the first unused space after that. And this is an SSD where you have to write an entire block at the same time, right? So what we're going to do, what are we going to do? We're going to write 4K blocks. Anybody see the problem?
Yeah.
Why don't we just start with this block?
Yeah. So every time I want to read the first block, I have to read this hard drive sector and that hard drive sector. And because it's unaligned, it's the same on every block. So every hard drive read at that point ends up being 2 hard drive reads. Yes, you absolutely kill your read, especially with random I/O, because then it's seeking twice for every single read. So what do? How do you fix that? When you partition your file system, or when you partition, you say, okay, instead of starting at, let's say it's 4K, right, and here's your MBR. Instead of starting immediately following the MBR, you do the math and you figure out where the first 4K block begins, and you do a 4K block there, right? At that point in time, every I/O that you issue is still going to only do 1 hard drive read, right?
Why doesn't everybody here know about this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right?
It sounds like, kill your read by at least half.
Yeah.
One person missing.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Why don't the hardware manufacturers just do that automatically?
Well, they can't.
Yeah, the OS.
Well, so a lot of OSs have gotten to the point where if you use like gparted, or I think Windows starting in 2008, is that right? 2008 server, did partition alignment for you because nobody did it. But if you run fdisk, you still screw up now. And what's even more, all of the layers of abstraction you put on top of the hard drive has the potential to screw it up too. Now, with a spinning disk, it's bad, right? Because it kills your performance. But with an SSD, think about what happens every time you write. You're actually writing 2 blocks.
Does that cut your longevity in half?
Not in half, but it does cut it down because if it's not aligned, remember that it's still writing 64K. Or, not 64K,
It's
but
only the last block that
yeah.
does too.
But it's not aligned, and it can cause lifetime issues. It'll cause I/O issues. The I/O issues will be less pronounced just because it's so damn fast. But you're still not doing yourself any favors. And if you've gone to all the expense of getting an SSD solution, don't screw yourself by not aligning your blocks and your partitions. But look it up. I mean, don't just take my word for it. Check out partition alignment and really read about it, because you owe it to yourself to figure out how to set up your world in a way that won't shoot yourself in the foot.
I've been paying attention to that actually from the perspective of ZFS, which really hates, if you've got a pool full of drives that are 512K block, and then you say, well, okay, that drive died. Now all I can buy is 4K drives.
Oh yeah.
And you can't. You can't. All you can do is build yourself a new pool with 4K drives and move your data.
Well, fortunately, the SAS drives are all 512. right? So if you're using enterprise drives, you don't have to worry about that as much, just because, you know, the individual drives. Now, when it comes to enterprise RAID arrays, it's more having to do with the stripe size. I mean, okay, back me up here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's my sanity check. You're-
It's also been driven by drive size, right?
How so?
Because for 3 and 4 terabyte drives, your block counts go through. Instead of 4K.
Oh, yeah.
4K blocks give you a table that's manageable.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff to keep track of, and frankly, with like the 4 terabyte drives, there's still a lot of stuff to take care of. And I imagine over time we're going to see that with Flash too, with the Flash translation layer, because we're at 1.2 terabyte drives now, I think, in Flash on the high end, and that's kind of ridiculous. That's a lot of individual segments to keep track of. So I imagine erasure block size is going to continue to increase, which is just going to screw all of us. Yeah, so we talked about trim. Is there anything strange here that I haven't talked about? Yeah, just so you know, and one of the professors at Northeastern is actually an SSD researcher, and he was like, is there anything that you want me to let them know? And he's like, for the love of God, be the person that tells them that trim doesn't actually erase stuff, because it doesn't. Trim just says, hey, it's cool to garbage collect that stuff, right? It doesn't happen immediately. It's just, it allows for it to happen.
Puts it in the list of stuff controller knows.
Yeah. It's like, treat that like old data because we don't care about that. Whenever you get a chance, clean that up or whatever. And that's all implementation specific to the controller. Linux trim support, right? So these are the file systems that I know of that support the discard option. So if in your mount, your fstab or whatever, you put minus, you put the -O discard on an SSD drive, that will turn on, and you can actually make sure through one of the parts of proc or sys, I can't remember honestly, but there is a kernel interface to check to see if trim is enabled. So the Linux kernel has various schedulers, and some of those things have to do with how it treats I/O. Especially like from the disk, because it's used to spinning disk, which has certain latency profiles. SSD doesn't have those latency profiles, so the no-op or the deadline is basically like, okay, I'm not going to wait for the spinning disk to screw around. So it will treat your I/O a little better. These are user land utilities for basically sending the commands to the disk that say, hey, that's cool. And it takes a little time to run, apparently. I haven't tried it yet. But that is a way, if for whatever reason you're using a file system that doesn't clean it up for you. Everybody with a Mac here, if you bought your Mac with an SSD, you already have trim enabled. If you install an aftermarket drive that has trim support, you can download that tool and it will basically enable it for you. I can give you the command if you want, but it's a really long system command. It's useless. Just download that. It's fine. Also, you should know that some drives don't support trim. Even now, I had a Crucial M something or other. It was like a new generation, for whatever reason, didn't support it, and I bricked it. So make sure your drive has trim. Tell your friends. Yeah, ZFS. Man, when I first heard about ZFS, it was through its acolytes, and I was like, there's no possible way any file system could be as good as these people say. I was wrong. It does things right, and in a lot of ways, it natively meshes with the way that SSDs work. So it has the ability to put the ZFS intent log, which you could think of as a journaling file system, or as a journal for a file system, I should say, on an SSD. So you take advantage of the fact that random I/O is very fast, and that these are random, or that these aren't random, but it's very fast I/O. The replacement cache, on the other hand, is random I/O, and you can point that at an SSD too. If you can run this arc summary command that will basically give you statistics on what your hit-miss cache ratio would be for that cache. So you can decide, well, is this worth an SSD? Is it not? And it's implementation specific, but it it's probably going to be, you know, worth the effort to get it, I think. So file systems in general. I mean, does every, you know, not every file system is optimized for SSD. I suspect that the things that make Riser FS really good for its use cases, like very tiny files, make it a poor choice for SSDs, just because of the minimal write size.
I mean, other than the dev going crazy.
Sorry?
Other than the dev going crazy.
You know, yeah, I don't care about that. I care about the technology. And, you know, it's just, I don't think it's a good fit, but I don't have any data to back that up. That's just my gut feeling. So if there is data out there, please send it to me, because I'm interested one way or another. Mount options. Mount no A time. Just do it, okay? If you're not familiar with the no A time option, it's basically, it's an antique Unixism that said, boy, it'd be really nice if we knew the last time anybody looked at that file. So why don't we do a disk write every time somebody looks at that file?
Like every time you run a find, or every time you run update DB, or every time, you know, you boot, or...
Anytime the file is read, it writes to disk, because that seemed like a good idea to somebody at a time. With, you know, a limited lifetime for writes, it's not really a good idea. And honestly, it's not really a good idea if you want any kind of performant I/O, because... And you can fake it anyway. So you fake it with touch and whatever. Just enable no A time and be happier. We talked about ZFS. I don't know ButterFS at all. So if anybody here does know ButterFS, I would love to talk to you about it, because I just, you know, no idea. And I also haven't decided about DRBD. So if you're familiar with DRBD, it's basically, or if you're not familiar, if you are familiar, I'm mansplaining to you. But if you don't know what it is, it's basically, it lives above the partition and below the file system, I want to say? Okay, and it basically sends blocks to another machine synchronously, so that you have two file systems in two places that are always identical as long as they're in sync. That strikes a chord with me when it comes to the way that the logical block addressing works with the underlying flash. I don't know how it'll work, and I couldn't possibly recommend it at this point. So you asked about SMART. The SMART information is vendor specific, because it's the controller that's telling you information. Unfortunately, I was gonna like, I'm gonna break out of here and I'm gonna show you the SMART control. This is a 2013 error, and the hard drive is not in SMART's database yet. I have Mac ports on here, and I read a thing where, you know, oh, okay, Mac ports has an old database. Make it from SourceForge, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'll do that, and it's still not in there. So if you have an older Mac, like say older than 2013, the database will probably have information. So pick up smartctl and run it. It's a really simple command, smartctl -a, and then your disk device, and it'll print out all of the SMART information that it knows. And it works on Mac, Windows, or Mac and Linux. And on Windows, there are like literally dozens of SMART reporting utilities. I don't know what to recommend, so check out the wiki page and find one you like. And I apologize right now for the next slide. It kind of violates most of the laws of good slidemanship. So I'm going to put it up here, but then I'm going to read it to you, because I don't expect that you'll be able to read it. And it has to do with forensics. Our results led to 3 conclusions. First, built-in commands are effective, but manufacturers sometimes implement them incorrectly. Second, overwriting the entire visible address space of an SSD twice is usually, but not always, sufficient to sanitize the drive. Third, none of the existing hard drive-oriented techniques for individual file sanitization is effective on SSDs. That's from a paper submitted to FAST 11 about forensics with solid-state drives. Basically, unless you wipe the drive twice, you can't clean it if the manufacturer hasn't supported it.
We shred drives.
That's the right way to do it.
I thought, and that guy's talking, I'm assuming it's on YouTube, because I think I've seen it. Didn't he say you can't erase drives regardless? He tried a bunch of different things and
this paper published in 2011 said that it was possible after twice to usually, but not always. Now, I actually talked with the researcher who has done work on this, and what they did was crazy, and they talk about it in the paper. They literally wrote stuff to the flash drives and then unmounted the chips from the circuit board, mounted them in this machine that they built to read the data from there, and they were able to recover the data.
Yeah, same.
Right? Yeah, okay, so So, like, that's crazy. And why twice? Why does twice work and once not? I think it's because, and I don't know this, but I think it's because of the misreported size, right? The fact that the drive size is actually larger than the reported size, so if you only write the reported size, you've got that extra space that you've got to erase that still has data on it. I mean, that's what makes sense to, yeah, logically to me. But it's just, again, freaking weird, man. I love this stuff. Right, so what happens when you put it in a RAID array? Yeah. So we talked about software RAID, versus hardware RAID, and I think your viewpoint on my opinion is probably correct, right? The difference, the ultimate difference between software and hardware RAID is probably where does the RAID code live? Does it live in the kernel, or does it live outside of the kernel, or on a separate device? I guess userland RAID does exist through Fuse and things like that. I would still call that software RAID, but if it lives on a separate card, you could probably consider it hardware RAID. But it's still software at some level. The problem is that all of the open source software RAID solutions that I know of, and even the Windows software RAID solution, doesn't support trim, right? So if you erase data in your file system, it doesn't pass the trim command along to the underlying disks, which is a real problem because over time your performance goes way downhill. So a lot of the enterprise solutions actually will do that. They support that, but it's all proprietary, all internal, and everybody says that they do in fact support freeing up the used and unused disk space. I couldn't tell you, to be very honest. Do you have any knowledge of how they implement that?
Not really. I mean, it really depends on the manufacturer.
Right, and so if you're going, yeah. I mean, there's so much that's just implementation specific. You really have to do your homework. And if you're thinking about buying a RAID array that includes flash as part of its intrinsic design, you need to talk to an engineer, and you need to satisfy yourself that it does in fact not kill performance over time because of the used space and unfreed space and things like that. Hopefully throughout the talk I've kind of given you enough information to intelligently ask questions, and that's my ultimate goal, because I certainly don't have all the answers, and most of the answers aren't knowable by people that aren't engineers at the companies, but at least we can make good decisions about whether or not we want to use a particular solution. Also, just so you know, there is an Intel RAID controller that supports trim if you use RAID 0. I know. with every single thing implied in that RAID 0 would be. But on the other hand, if you're using SSDs in RAID 0, you're probably going so fast you don't care. So.
Would you suggest using SSDs in anything other than RAID 1?
So.
I can't think of a use case other than
Sure.
Enterprise array.
In an enterprise array or on my own?
Enterprise array.
In an enterprise array, all of that should be kind of taken away from you and your decisions, right? A lot of it really should, because I wouldn't recommend using RAID 5 with SSDs. You can. A lot of the write penalty things, are going to be less vile just because it's so fast. It's just such a weird kind of thing that all of the RAID-specific solutions that I'm seeing are by companies who have engineered their own controllers and their own RAID solutions. I will get to you in 1 second. A lot of the RAID-ish solutions that I've seen coming out, particularly in the scale-out stuff, is using erasure codes, which makes a lot more sense for a RAID environment or for a solid-state drive environment than it does maybe in spinning disk. So if you're not familiar with erasure codes, just out of curiosity, just because I'm curious, anybody here know about erasure codes? All right. So erasure codes are interesting. It's a mathematical way that I think it's kind of related to cryptography in terms of the use case. Imagine you have a certain size data set, and you want to split that up, and you want to make sure that it's redundant. But you would also like to not be able, or not have to get everything back. So I'll come over here and diagram again. So we have a chunk of data. And we have a scale-out storage solution around the world, we'll say, right? So our chunk of data is here. And we want everybody to be able to get that data. So we're going to put a copy everywhere. Now, we could do that, right? But what if we lose a copy? Well, that kind of sucks. So why don't we put 2 copies here? You can do that, but then you're wasting space. So what you can do is there's a mathematical function that you can apply to the data to break it up into chunks. Okay? So instead of 1 block, we have some chunks there. Oh, that's too similar. And we have some chunks here. Okay. So that data has become those chunks. Erasure coding is a way of saying, okay, I have that many chunks. I want to be able to completely recreate the data based on any 4 blocks. Okay? Any 4 blocks. So what we do is we take these 7 blocks and we distribute them throughout. Okay? So if we have, blocks here, we can even have a couple, extra blocks where every particular size or every site has a smaller amount than the total, but it has a subset. And then you ask this system, this storage system, for the data. The first 4 blocks that get returned to you, the first 4, any blocks that get returned to you, are enough for you to rehydrate the data. So that means the 4 fastest blocks will give you the data you need. Okay? It doesn't seem right the first time you encounter it. You're like, but you broke it up into these blocks, this, N and M, and yeah, you can think of it like that. But a checksum where you could build the data from it. It's like data and checksum together, and you build the entire thing from the first 4, in this case, blocks. And they're dials that you can pick. You can say, I want it to be this redundant. I want it to need this many. And it's a trade-off. It's a sliding scale in terms of the size and the amount of data that you're replicating. But think about that inside of an SSD array. If you have 8 SSDs, you could put them in a RAID 6. Or you could treat each one like an individual, global file system kind of thing, an object store in this case. And you could say, I'm going to distribute these blocks over these solid-state drives. That way, if you lose one, it doesn't matter, because you can still recover from the next 4 fastest blocks.
What's that called?
Erasure coding. Okay?
This is what more and more arrays are doing these
Yeah.
days. RAID as a technology is really going away because they're getting rid of the idea of protecting an entire drive or an entire spindle or an entire flash drive, and they're moving toward this block-based approach, which has a lot of advantages.
Yeah, it really does. But it's so completely weird and different than everything we're used to. But you know, every really cool thing that's coming out, all the scale out stuff, all the really wild, like how are they going to do that, is probably using erasure codes and probably using different techniques than we've ever used before, right? So it's important to kind of keep up and read about what's happening. I didn't put them in my slide, but I can give you some blogs that you should totally follow if you're into storage or if you want to be into storage. So trim and garbage collection, we talked about this. You know, is the RAID passing the trim? Well, with open source, no. With all of the cards that I know, no, except for that one Intel card with RAID 0. And hey, that's up to you, man. All right, access bandwidth. Yeah, how much bandwidth does each of the drives have versus the bus versus the, you know, everything. So like, here's that throughput example I was going to give you. 4.15 gigawatts or gigabytes or whatever. Yeah, that's pretty impressive, man. So just because it's in a RAID array doesn't mean it's magic, okay? And like we talked about, you can't trust vendors to tell you the truth with an asterisk next to it. You know, you've got to dig in and find out. What a lot of people are doing is tiering. And that's where you use these cheap disks, slightly less cheap disks, and then SSDs, and then RAM on top, right? And then some people are like, well, we're going to cache up here. And then some people are like, well, if you request blocks often enough, I'm going to consider those blocks hot, and I'm going to move them up the stack to the faster media. Future technology, what are we going to get? We're going to get enhanced capacity. That's like a no-brainer. We're going to find new ways to stack more data into smaller spaces. That's easy. Enhanced longevity. These are cool. Oh, by the way, that picture, that's Kowloon Walled City. Are you guys familiar with this? It's cool. I'll tell you afterwards if you stick around. It's in Hong Kong. Was. These are telomerase, which basically indicate how long you're going to live, and increased longevity. So check this out. They have done prototype testing of the cells, right, with the top where the electrons accumulate, melting them and redistributing to eliminate the charge so that you can redo it. Yeah, how cool is that? Also, smart SSDs. The fact that we have quad-core SSDs means that we're going to start using those unused processors, and we're going to start distributing workload to this. I went to a thesis defense from somebody who's actually written code to run on an SSD RAID array so that they can do I/O, not just computations on the drive, but also decisions based on the contents of that disk. Nuts. It's going to be crazy. Guys, thank you so much for sticking around and for coming back after break. I appreciate it. I hope it was interesting.